Listen closely. Can you hear it? That sound, the gentle creak of ancient timbers, the whisper of wind across forgotten seas. It's the echo of a secret, a story left untold for centuries. What if I told you that the greatest fortunes the world has ever known aren't just legends in dusty books? What if they are still out there, hidden in shadowy jungles, buried beneath desert sands, or resting in the silent darkness of the deep ocean, just waiting for the right moment to be found? These aren't mere fantasies, for as long as humans have walked the earth, we have been dreamers and builders, creators and collectors. And with every empire that rose and fell, with every ship that sailed into the unknown, unimaginable wealth, gold, jewels, artifacts of immense power and beauty vanished from the pages of history, leaving behind only tantalizing clues and whispers of their existence. This is the allure of the lost treasure, a mystery that calls to the adventurer in all of us. It's a siren song that has drawn explorers to the farthest corners of the globe, fueled expeditions that have reshaped maps, and inspired tales so incredible they often blur the line between history and myth. We are about to embark on a global journey, a quest to uncover 25 of history's most legendary lost treasures. Our path will take us from the sunken holds of Spanish galleons, their wooden ribs cradling tons of New World gold, to the sealed, silent chambers of hidden royal tombs, where pharaohs and emperors were laid to rest with riches beyond comprehension. We will track the path of armies that disappeared with their plunder and unravel the codes of master criminals who hid their loot in places only they could find. Some of these stories are quite frankly stranger than anything fiction could invent. They are tales of ambition and greed, of brilliant craftsmanship and shocking misfortune. They speak to a universal human longing not just for wealth, but for connection to the past, for the thrill of the hunt, and for the profound moment of discovery that changes everything. So join me as we pull back the curtain on these enduring enigmas. We will separate fact from folklore, examine the evidence, and follow the trails that have captivated generations. The map is unrolled, the compass is set, adventure awaits. Our journey begins not in the tropics or a desert, but within the opulent halls of a Russian palace, with a treasure so magnificent it was once called the eighth wonder of the world. This is the story of the Amber Room. Imagine an entire chamber, walls stretching over 180 square feet, covered in over 6 tons of the most exquisite amber, meticulously carved into intricate mosaics and framed in gold leaf. The panels were backed with mirrors that would have reflected the warm, honeyed light of the gemstone resin, creating a space that glowed as if lit from within. Crafted by the finest artisans in Prussia in the early 18th century, it was a masterpiece of Baroque art, a gift from King Frederick William I to Tsar Peter the Great, solidifying an alliance between two empires. For 2 centuries, it resided in the Catherine Palace near St. Petersburg, a symbol of immense wealth and artistic achievement. Its value today considered almost incalculable, likely worth over $500 million. But this breathtaking wonder would become one of the most tragic casualties of the Second World War. As Nazi forces advanced into the Soviet Union in 1941, curators at the Catherine Palace made a desperate attempt to save the room. Knowing the panels were too fragile to remove quickly, they tried to conceal them by covering the amber with simple wallpaper. The deception was feeble. The German troops, specifically a unit tasked with seizing cultural treasures, saw through it immediately. They dismantled the entire room in just 36 hours, packed the priceless panels into 27 crates, and shipped them to Königsberg Castle, in what was then East Prussia. The Amber Room was reassembled there and put on display, but its time in the spotlight was short. As the war turned against Germany and Allied bombs began to fall on the city in 1944, the order was given to pack it away once more. The crates were sealed and stored in the castle's vaults, and then they vanished from history. The fate of the Amber Room is one of the 20th century's greatest historical puzzles. The most widely accepted theory is that it was destroyed in the fierce battles and subsequent fire that consumed Königsberg Castle in the final days of the war. If that is true, then this incredible creation was reduced to ashes. Yet, the absence of definitive physical evidence has fueled countless other possibilities. Some researchers believe the crates were loaded onto a ship, the Wilhelm Gustloff, which was torpedoed and sank in the Baltic Sea in 1945, taking the treasure to a watery grave. Others are convinced the Nazis managed to hide the room in a secret underground bunker or a mine complex in the surrounding countryside, a theory supported by sporadic claims from witnesses and the discovery of a single, small mosaic from the room in 1997. Despite numerous searches by treasure hunters, governments, and even amateur historians, the main body of the Amber Room remains elusive. Its story is a haunting reminder of the immense cultural loss of war, a ghost of gilded beauty lingering just out of sight, challenging us to wonder if it is truly gone forever or simply waiting in darkness to be found. From the vanished opulence of the Amber Room, we turn to a relic of an entirely different nature, one whose value is measured not in gold or gemstones, but in sheer world-altering power. This is the mystery of the Ark of the Covenant, described in the Hebrew Bible as a sacred chest constructed from acacia wood and overlaid entirely with pure gold. It was far more than a container. It was the very throne of God on earth. Its design was incredibly specific, topped by a solid gold cover known as the mercy seat, flanked by two cherubim with wings outstretched. Within this chest were kept the most sacred objects of the Israelite people, the two stone tablets inscribed with the 10 Commandments, a pot of manna from the wilderness, and the rod of Aaron. But this was no passive treasure to be admired. The Ark was believed to be a direct conduit to the divine, a weapon of immense power that could part the waters of the Jordan River, lay waste to the walls of Jericho, and unleash fatal bolts of energy against those who treated it without the proper reverence. To possess it was not merely to own a priceless artifact, it was to hold a key to celestial authority. For centuries, the Ark resided in the Holy of Holies, the innermost and most sacred chamber of the first temple in Jerusalem, built by King Solomon. Only the high priest was permitted to enter its presence, and even then, only once a year on Yom Kippur, after elaborate rituals of purification. It was the ultimate symbol of God's covenant with His people, the heart of their spiritual and national identity. But then, history delivers a crushing blow. In the year 587 before the Common Era, the mighty Babylonian Empire under King Nebuchadnezzar II laid siege to Jerusalem. The city was sacked, Solomon's magnificent temple was razed to the ground, and the treasures of the kingdom were carried off as spoils of war. And from that moment, the Ark of the Covenant vanishes from the biblical record. It is not listed among the plunder taken to Babylon, leaving a void that has fueled 25 centuries of speculation and search. So, what happened to it? The theories are as dramatic as the artifact itself. One prominent Jewish tradition suggests that the prophet Jeremiah, foreseeing the coming destruction, took the Ark and the tabernacle and hid them in a cave on Mount Nebo, the same mountain from which Moses viewed the Promised Land. The apocryphal second book of Maccabees supports this, stating the location would remain secret until God gathers His people together again. Another, more straightforward theory is that the Ark was indeed taken to Babylon, perhaps melted down for its gold, its divine power unable to save it from the mundane greed of conquerors. Yet, its absence from the official Babylonian inventory casts doubt on this fate. The most enduring and captivating theory, however, comes from Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church claims with absolute conviction that the Ark has resided in their country for millennia. Their sacred text, the Kebra Nagast, or Glory of the Kings, tells an incredible story. It recounts that Menelik I, the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, traveled to Jerusalem to meet his father. Upon his return to Ethiopia, he was accompanied by a group of Israelite nobles who, unbeknownst to Menelik, smuggled the ark out of the temple and brought it with them. The tradition holds that it now rests in the chapel of the tablet, a small treasury adjacent to the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in the town of Axum. A single guardian, a monk who dedicates his entire life to this sacred duty, is the only soul allowed to see it, while the Church has never allowed international experts to examine the object they claim to be the ark. The strength of this belief is a central pillar of Ethiopian national and religious identity, making the claim impossible to dismiss outright. This profound mystery has, of course, spilled over from theology into popular culture, most famously in the blockbuster film Raiders of the Lost Ark, which presented a fictionalized version of a Nazi search for the relic. In reality, modern searches have been more scholarly, with archaeologists and historians examining ancient texts, surveying potential hiding places like tunnel systems beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and debating the evidence. Yet, the Ark remains as elusive as ever. Its power today lies not in its potential to strike down armies, but in its ability to captivate our imagination, representing an ultimate, unattainable link between the human and the divine, a secret from the dawn of faith that the world is still not ready to reveal. But a sacred relic is not the only kind of power that can vanish into the mists of history. Sometimes the lure is much more direct, a mountain of tangible wealth so immense it can corrupt the soul in an instant. This brings us to a tale of revolution, piracy, and a staggering betrayal on the high seas, the lost treasure of Lima. Picture the scene. The year is 1820, and the fires of revolution are sweeping across South America. The great liberator, Simón Bolívar, is leading his armies, and the Spanish colonial government in Peru is in a state of sheer panic. For centuries, Lima had been a repository of almost unimaginable wealth, a place where gold and silver from the mines of the Andes were gathered before being shipped to Spain. But now, with the revolutionary forces closing in, that treasure was no longer an asset, it was a target. The Spanish authorities made a desperate decision. They couldn't risk sending the treasure overland, and they no longer trusted their own navy. Instead, they turned to a neutral party, a British ship captain named William Thompson, commander of the merchant brig Mary Dear. They entrusted him with the city's entire fortune, a hoard that included not just gold and silver bars, but also a breathtaking collection of jewels, gold chalices, and perhaps most famously, a solid gold, life-sized statue of the Virgin Mary adorned with precious stones. The value of this cargo today would be impossible to calculate with any certainty, but estimates often place it well into the hundreds of millions, if not billions, of dollars. Captain Thompson's orders were simple: sail from the port of Callao and keep the treasure safe at sea until the Spanish forces could regain control of Lima. To ensure the security of this priceless cargo, a contingent of Spanish soldiers and priests boarded the Mary Dear as guards. It must have been a tense voyage from the very beginning. For Thompson and his crew, a group of seasoned sailors, the temptation of sitting atop such a fortune must have been overwhelming. The legend tells us that, just a few days into the journey, the lure proved too strong. In a bloody act of mutiny, Thompson and his men slaughtered the Spanish guards and the accompanying priests, throwing their bodies overboard. They were now in possession of one of the greatest pirate hauls in history, but they had a new problem: what to do with it. They couldn't simply sail into a port and start spending Spanish gold. They needed a place to hide the treasure, a remote location where they could lie low, divide the loot, and eventually return to retrieve their shares. Their destination was a tiny, uninhabited speck of land in the Pacific Ocean, about 340 miles off the coast of Costa Rica, Cocos Island. Shrouded in mist and dense rainforest, Cocos Island was the perfect hiding place. It was far from any major shipping lanes, notoriously difficult to navigate due to its rocky coastline and treacherous currents, and offered countless caves and waterfalls where a fortune could be concealed. According to the story, Thompson and his crew spent several days on the island, carefully hauling the treasure inland and hiding it in a cave, possibly behind a waterfall. They made detailed maps and charts, intending to return once the heat from their crime had died down, but fate had other plans. The Merry Deer was eventually captured by a Spanish warship. Most of the crew were executed for piracy on the spot. Only Captain Thompson and his first mate were spared, on the condition that they lead the Spanish back to the treasure. Thompson agreed, but as the story goes, when they reached Coco's Island, he and his mate managed to escape into the jungle. The Spanish searched frantically but found nothing, and the two survivors eventually made it back to civilization, though Thompson would die years later without ever revealing the exact location, but not before passing a map to a friend. This single act of betrayal created one of the most persistent treasure hunting legends of all time. The idea of a solid gold statue of the Virgin Mary waiting in a cave has drawn adventurers to Coco's Island for over 200 years. The most famous of these seekers was the American adventurer Augustus G. L. Gisler, who in the late 19th century even persuaded the Costa Rican government to appoint him governor of the island in his obsessive, but ultimately fruitless 30-year search. Perhaps the most intriguing expedition was undertaken by a young Franklin D. Roosevelt, who visited the island in 1935 while serving as President of the United States. He was an avid sailor and historian, and the lure of the Leam, a treasure, was a powerful draw, though his presidential duties likely prevented a thorough search. Over the decades, dozens of other expeditions have scoured the island, using everything from old maps to modern ground-penetrating radar. They have found small clues, an old anchor, a Spanish dagger, but never the main hoard. The island's challenging terrain, combined with the possibility that the treasure might be hidden in an underwater cavern accessible only at certain tides, has kept the secret safe. The legend of the Leam, a treasure, endures as a classic archetype of the pirate myth, a story of ultimate temptation and the price of greed, a fortune that seems to be forever just out of reach, hidden by nature and guarded by the ghosts of those who died for it. While the treasure of Lima represents a fortune gathered from an entire continent, our next mystery revolves around the singular, breathtaking beauty of one extraordinary gemstone, the Florentine diamond. This was not merely a large diamond, it was a masterpiece of the lapidary's art, a pale yellow stone of 137 carats, cut into a unique double rosette shape with 126 facets that captured the light in a way no other diamond could. Its history is as rich as its appearance, a jewel that passed through the hands of dukes, emperors, and kings, only to vanish at the dawn of the modern era, leaving behind a ghost of golden light. The diamond's documented journey begins in the 15th century, likely originating from the legendary Golconda mines in India, the source of the world's most celebrated historical diamonds. It first appears in European history as a prized possession of the powerful Medici family, the bankers and de facto rulers of Renaissance Florence. There, it became a symbol of their immense wealth and refined taste, a centerpiece of their unparalleled collection of art and Chinese letter. When the Medici line died out in the 18th century, the diamond passed by marriage to the House of Lorraine and eventually became part of the Austrian crown jewels, where it found a permanent home for nearly 2 centuries. It was set into the crown of the Habsburg emperors, a dynasty that ruled much of Europe, and was worn as a hat ornament by the rulers of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. To see the Florentine diamond was to see the embodiment of imperial power and centuries of accumulated wealth. This long and stable history came to a sudden and dramatic end with the conclusion of the First World War. In 1918, the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed, and the last Habsburg emperor, Charles I, was forced into exile. In the ensuing chaos, the crown jewels were moved from Vienna to Switzerland for safekeeping. It was during this transfer that the Florentine diamond disappeared. The official inventory of the jewels that arrived in Switzerland listed the diamond's setting, but the stone itself was gone. The question of what happened next has preoccupied gemologists, historians, and treasure hunters for over a century. Several compelling theories attempt to explain its fate. The most plausible suggests that the exiled Habsburg family, stripped of their power and wealth, secretly sold the diamond to fund their lives in exile and their attempts to regain the throne. This would have been a transaction conducted in the utmost secrecy, as the stone was legally considered state property of the new Austrian Republic. If it was sold, it would have been to an extremely private collector who would have had every reason to keep such an acquisition hidden from the world. Another theory posits that the diamond was smuggled to South America, a common refuge for former European nobility and wealth after the war, where it remains in a private vault, its existence known only to a select few. A more tragic possibility is that the diamond was recut. Its unique double rosette cut was instantly recognizable. To make the stone disposable on the open market without attracting attention, a desperate seller might have had it cleaved into several smaller, more anonymous stones. While this would have destroyed its historical and artistic value, it would have allowed the gem's raw material value to be cashed in discreetly. The thought that such a unique work of art could have been broken apart is heartbreaking to historians. There are even wilder, less substantiated rumors that it was lost overboard during the transfer to Switzerland or stolen by a rogue official. The estimated value of the Florentine diamond today is staggering, likely exceeding $75 million, but its true worth is historical and artistic. It represents a lost chapter in the history of gem cutting and a tangible link to the Renaissance and the Age of Empires. Its disappearance is a classic mystery of the 20th century, a case where a world-famous object simply evaporated amid political turmoil. Unlike a treasure hidden on a remote island, the Florentine diamond could be anywhere sitting unrecognized in a private collection, broken into pieces in a piece of modern jewelry, or still hidden away, waiting for the day when its golden fire can once again captivate the world. Now we shift from the intrigues of European courts and pirate coves to a discovery of an entirely different kind, one that emerged not from the sea, but from the dry, heat-baked earth of the Judean desert. While the world was captivated by the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the late 1940s, ancient religious manuscripts that revolutionized our understanding of the Hebrew Bible, another, far stranger find was made. In 1952, archaeologists exploring a cave near the ruins of Qumran unearthed something that defied all expectations. It wasn't made of fragile parchment or papyrus, but of metal. This was the copper scroll, and it was unlike any of its companions. While the other scrolls contained sacred texts, this one held what appeared to be a straightforward, if utterly baffling, inventory of buried treasure. The physical object itself is a marvel. Composed of 2 rolls of almost pure copper, it was so corroded and brittle that scholars faced a tremendous challenge simply to open it without destroying it. They eventually had to saw it into strips to read the text engraved upon it. The contents, once deciphered, were staggering. Written in a form of Hebrew, the scroll lists 64 distinct locations where immense quantities of gold, silver, precious vessels, and even other scrolls were supposedly hidden. We are not talking about small caches. The amounts are almost fantastical, describing tons of precious metal. The total tally is mind-boggling, with estimates suggesting a value in the hundreds of millions, if not billions, of dollars in today's terms. But here lies the central mystery. Is this an authentic treasure map or an elaborate work of ancient fiction? The challenge for any would-be treasure hunter is that the directions are frustratingly cryptic. They don't provide clear geographical coordinates. Instead, they read like a local's notes, referencing landmarks that would have been obvious 2,000 years ago but are now lost to time. The scroll mentions places like the ruin that is in the valley, the tomb of the queen, the gutters of the bathhouse, or instructions to dig a distance of 40 cubits from the great stone. These descriptions are vague enough to apply to countless locations across the rugged landscape of the Judean desert. Imagine having a map that says, "Turn left at the big oak tree," but the tree has been gone for 2 millennia. This has led to a fierce debate among scholars. One camp believes the scroll is a genuine record, perhaps documenting the treasure of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, hidden away to protect it from the advancing Roman legions during the First Jewish-Roman War around 70 Common Era. The Qumran community, often associated with the Essenes, might have been tasked with safeguarding this immense wealth. The other camp argues that the language and the sheer scale of the treasure point to a folk tale or a literary exercise. The amounts of precious metal are so vast they seem to defy reality, more akin to a legendary hoard from a myth than a practical inventory. Could it be that the Copper Scroll is not a factual document, but rather a piece of religious allegory, a description of a heavenly treasure, or a symbolic text never meant to be taken literally? This division of opinion is what makes the scroll so compelling. It sits at the perfect intersection of history and mystery, offering just enough detail to feel real, but remaining sufficiently obscure to be unverifiable. This tantalizing ambiguity has, of course, inspired numerous expeditions. Modern treasure hunters and archaeologists, armed with technology far beyond what was available in the 1950s, have taken up the challenge. They have used ground-penetrating radar, satellite imagery, and drones to scan the areas around Qumran and other sites mentioned in the scroll, searching for anomalies in the soil that might indicate ancient digging or hidden chambers. Some searches have yielded intriguing clues: small tunnels, ancient water systems that could be the gutters mentioned, or hidden cavities, but no definitive, massive hoard has ever been recovered. The desert is a vast and secretive place, and it has guarded its secrets well. The Copper Scroll remains one of history's greatest unsolved puzzles, a list of impossible wealth etched in metal, daring us to believe that a fortune from the time of Jesus still lies buried somewhere in the Holy Land, waiting for the right person to finally understand its ancient, poetic clues. Leaving behind the ancient deserts of the Middle East, we arrive at a mystery set against a backdrop of much more recent political turmoil. One that combines audacious crime with a scandal that reached the highest levels of the British Empire. This is the baffling disappearance of what became known, somewhat incorrectly, as the crown jewels of Ireland. They were not a crown in the traditional sense, but rather the magnificent ceremonial insignia of the most illustrious Order of St. Patrick, an order of chivalry established by the British monarchy in 1783. The centerpieces of this collection were breathtakingly opulent: a large, 8-pointed star made of Brazilian diamonds and a spectacular diamond badge, often described as a sunburst, which was in fact the personal property of the Queen at the time. These pieces, along with 5 gold collars of the Knights of the Order, were encrusted with hundreds of precious stones, forming a collection of immense symbolic and monetary value, all housed within the very heart of British authority in Ireland, Dublin Castle. The theft itself was a masterpiece of boldness and timing. It was the summer of 1907, and a grand state visit to Dublin by King Edward VII was just days away. A central part of the planned festivities was a ceremony where the king would invest a new knight into the Order of St. Patrick, an event that would require the jewels to be worn. The insignia was kept in a specially designed safe within the castle's Bedford Tower, a strong room that was supposed to be impregnable. Access was strictly controlled by the Ulster King of Arms, Sir Arthur Vickers, the man ultimately responsible for their safekeeping. Yet, on the morning of July 6th, a horrifying discovery was made. The safe was unlocked, and the jewel-filled compartments inside were empty. The most powerful symbols of the Crown's presence in Ireland had vanished from under the noses of its own administration, just as the king was about to arrive. The audacity of the crime was staggering, a profound and very public humiliation for the British government. What followed was an investigation that quickly became mired in rumor, incompetence, and allegations of a high-level cover-up. The immediate suspect list was short and scandalous, pointing squarely to an inside job. The safe showed no signs of forced entry, meaning the thief almost certainly had a key. Suspicion fell on Vickers and his staff, and the investigation uncovered a culture of shocking negligence within the office of the Ulster King of Arms. Vickers was known to have hosted drunken parties in the very building where the jewels were kept, and he was accused of having allowed unauthorized individuals access to the keys. In fact, it was revealed that the keys to the safe had been left in the pocket of a staff member's uniform when it was sent out to be cleaned, a breathtaking lapse in security. The police were presented with a cast of characters straight out of a detective novel, including Francis Shackleton, the brother of the famous explorer Ernest Shackleton, who was a close associate of Vickers and a man with rumored financial difficulties and connections to homosexual circles, which at the time was a criminal offense. The official investigation, led by the Crown, seemed less interested in finding the jewels than in containing the scandal. Vickers was made the scapegoat and forced to resign in disgrace, but no one was ever criminally charged with the theft. The enduring mystery is not just who took the jewels, but why. This is what sets this theft apart. Unlike most jewel heists, the Irish crown jewels were never seen again. They were never offered for ransom, and no attempt was ever made to sell them on the black market. This is the crucial clue. The jewels were so unique, so famous, and so thoroughly documented that they would have been completely impossible to dismantle or sell anywhere in the world without immediate recognition. So why steal them? The leading theory, one that has persisted for over a century, is that the theft was not about financial gain at all, but was an act of political blackmail. The intention, according to this line of thought, was to compromise high-ranking officials within the castle administration who were vulnerable to exposure over their private lives. By stealing the jewels in a way that pointed to an inside job, the thieves could hold the threat of a devastating scandal over the heads of the establishment, ensuring their silence or compliance. The jewels themselves were not the prize. The embarrassment they caused was the real weapon. They may have been quietly destroyed or hidden away forever once their purpose was served, leaving behind a century of speculation and a lingering stain on the final years of British rule in Ireland. From the smoke-filled rooms of Dublin Castle, we now set sail for the sun-drenched but treacherous waters of the Caribbean, to the story of a ship whose very name still makes historians and treasure hunters draw a sharp breath, the Spanish galleon San Jose. Known today as the Holy Grail of shipwrecks, this vessel represents perhaps the single most valuable shipwreck ever lost at sea. Its story is a dramatic tapestry woven from global war, staggering wealth, and a final, violent confrontation that sent a king's ransom to the ocean floor. Picture the political landscape of Europe in the early 18th century. The War of the Spanish Succession was raging, a continent-wide conflict over who would inherit the vast Spanish Empire. The treasury of King Philip V was nearly depleted, funding armies across multiple fronts. The only solution was to summon the wealth of the New World. In 1708, a Spanish treasure fleet set sail from Portobelo in modern-day Panama, its most prized vessel being the 62-gun galleon San Jose. Its holds were not filled with ordinary cargo. They were packed to the beams with a fortune that defied belief. Official manifests and historical accounts describe a cargo of 11 million gold and silver coins, alongside a private consignment of 116 chests of emeralds from the mines of Muzo in Colombia, and vast quantities of Chinese porcelain and other precious goods. The total estimated value today is almost incomprehensible, with figures ranging from 10 to an astonishing $17 billion. This was not just a shipment, it was a floating bank, an entire nation's financial lifeblood sailing across the ocean. The British Royal Navy, fully aware of the strategic importance of this treasure, was determined to intercept it. On the evening of June 8, 1708, a British squadron of 4 ships under Commodore Charles Wager located the Spanish fleet near Baru Island, off the coast of present-day Colombia. What followed was a fierce and chaotic naval battle under the cover of darkness. Wager's flagship, the HMS Expedition, engaged the San Jose directly. The galleon was a formidable opponent, but during the intense cannonade, a catastrophic event occurred. A British broadside is believed to have ignited the San Jose's powder magazine. The resulting explosion was horrific, tearing the great ship in two. It sank almost instantly, taking with it nearly all of its 600 crew and passengers, and its unimaginable treasure, down to a depth of over 2,000 feet. For 3 centuries, the exact location of the wreck remained one of the ocean's most fiercely guarded secrets, a ghost ship at the bottom of the sea. The modern chapter of this saga began in 2015, when an international team of marine archaeologists and engineers, funded by the Colombian government and working with the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, made a monumental announcement. After years of secretive surveying, they had positively identified the wreck of the San Jose. The discovery was made using a state-of-the-art autonomous underwater vehicle named Remus 6000, which was able to dive to the extreme depths and capture detailed sonar images. The clincher was the identification of the ship's unique bronze cannons, which bore dolphin engravings perfectly matching the historical records for the San Jose. The world had found its holy grail, but locating the wreck was only the beginning of the story. It opened a Pandora's box of legal, ethical, and diplomatic disputes that continue to this day. The central question is brutally simple: who does this colossal treasure belong to? The Colombian government claims sovereignty as the wreck lies within its territorial waters. The government of Spain, however, asserts ownership under the principle of sovereign immunity, arguing that the San Jose was a warship of the Spanish Navy on a state mission, and therefore its remains and the souls of the sailors lost with it are protected as a state vessel and a maritime gravesite. Complicating matters further is an American salvage company, Sea Search Armada, which claims it first located the general area of the wreck in the 1980s and has since been engaged in a protracted legal battle with Colombia over a supposed 50% share of any recovered treasure. This multi-sided conflict has plunged the project into a quagmire of international law, slowing any potential recovery to a crawl. Beyond the courtrooms, the technical challenges of recovering the treasure are as immense as the depth of the wreck itself. Working at over 2,000 feet requires incredibly sophisticated and expensive robotic submersibles. The seafloor environment is harsh, and the centuries-old wooden structure of the galleon is incredibly fragile. Any recovery operation must be conducted with the utmost care, not as a crude treasure hunt, but as a delicate archaeological excavation. The goal is to preserve the historical integrity of the site, to learn from the artifacts, and to treat the final resting place of hundreds of souls with respect. Colombia has announced ambitious plans to raise the wreck and its contents, even building a dedicated museum to house the finds, but the project is plagued by the colossal costs and the unresolved legal battles. The San Jose, therefore, remains in a strange limbo, found but untouched, its treasure visible yet unreachable, a billion-dollar prize suspended in the deep, guarded by history, law, and the sea itself. Our journey now takes us from the sunken gold of the Caribbean into the cold, stone heart of Russian power, to a treasure whose value is measured not in precious metals but in lost knowledge. This is the enduring legend of the Lost Library of the Moscow Tsars, a collection often referred to as the Library of Ivan the Terrible. The story begins with a marriage that would alter the course of Russian history. In 1472, Ivan III, the Grand Prince of Moscow, sought to elevate his realm's prestige. He married Sophia Paleologina, the niece of the last emperor of the Byzantine Empire, which had fallen to the Ottoman Turks just 19 years earlier. Sophia was a woman of immense culture and education, raised in the papal court in Rome, and she brought with her to the remote, wooded principality of Moscow more than just a royal title. According to the legend, her most significant dowry was a vast collection of ancient Greek and Roman manuscripts, a library salvaged from the ashes of Constantinople. This was not a random assortment of books. It was purportedly a treasure trove of classical learning that had been painstakingly preserved for centuries, containing works that had long since vanished from the rest of Europe. The potential contents of this library are what make the legend so captivating to historians. Imagine the possibility of recovering lost plays by the great tragedians like Sophocles or Aeschylus, works that would redefine our understanding of ancient Greek drama. Consider the tantalizing prospect of finding missing historical volumes by authors like Tacitus, or even philosophical texts by Aristotle that are known only by their titles, their wisdom lost to time. This collection was said to include illuminated manuscripts, rare maps, and scientific treatises that could fill critical gaps in our knowledge of the ancient world. For scholars, the value of such a discovery would be immeasurable, far surpassing that of any gemstone or gold coin. The library was initially housed within the Moscow Kremlin, and it was supposedly expanded by subsequent rulers, most notably by Ivan IV, known to history as Ivan the Terrible. A complex and deeply paranoid ruler, Ivan was also a highly educated man, fluent in several languages and possessed of a formidable intellect. It is believed that he took a personal interest in this invaluable collection, and as his reign grew more turbulent and his fears of betrayal intensified, he may have taken drastic measures to protect it. This is where the mystery truly deepens. The library vanishes from the historical record sometime during Ivan the Terrible's reign in the 16th century. The most common theory is that, fearing its destruction or seizure by his enemies, Ivan ordered the entire collection to be hidden away in a secret location. Persistent rumors and fragmented accounts from the time speak of a labyrinth of hidden passages and underground chambers beneath the Kremlin, a network of tunnels and vaults constructed on Ivan's orders. Some tales suggest the books were bricked up in a concealed room or placed deep within the catacombs beneath the city, their entrance forgotten over the centuries. Over the years, there have been numerous organized searches for the library. In the 18th century, Empress Catherine the Great, a great admirer of the Enlightenment, commissioned a search of the Kremlin cellars, hoping to add the classical texts to her own immense collection. During the Soviet era, secret police units and archaeologists, sometimes working in tandem, explored the subterranean world beneath Moscow, both to fortify the city's defenses and in the hope of uncovering this national treasure. While they discovered many hidden rooms and tunnels, the library itself remained elusive. Skeptics, however, offer a more prosaic, though equally tragic, explanation. They argue that the library likely never survived the frequent fires that ravaged Moscow, particularly the Great Fire of 1571, which caused widespread devastation. Manuscripts, being highly flammable, would have been incredibly vulnerable. It is entirely possible that this great repository of knowledge was reduced to ashes centuries ago, its existence fading into myth. Another school of thought suggests that the legend itself was amplified over time, a story that grew in the telling, perhaps originating from a modest collection of books that Sophia did indeed bring, but which was nowhere near as comprehensive as later generations imagined. The story of the lost library of the Moscow Tsars endures because it speaks to a profound human desire, the hope that the wisdom of the past is not entirely lost, that a great discovery is still waiting in the shadows, capable of rewriting history itself. It is a ghost of parchment and ink, a silent guardian of antiquity's greatest secrets. The saga of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is perhaps the most romanticized outlaw tale in American history, a story that didn't end with a hail of bullets in Bolivia as the classic film suggests, but that may have left a final, tantalizing clue in the windswept vastness of Patagonia. After years of successfully robbing banks and trains across the American West, the pressures of their notoriety and the relentless pursuit of the Pinkerton Detective Agency became too intense. Seeking a fresh start, the duo, along with Sundance's companion, Etta Place, orchestrated a brilliant escape. They traveled to New York City under assumed names and in 1901 boarded a steamship bound for Buenos Aires, effectively vanishing from the United States and seemingly from the pages of history. They initially tried their hand at ranching, purchasing a small property in a quiet region of Argentina, attempting to live as honest settlers, but the lure of easy money and the thrill of the heist proved too strong to resist. The legend that brings us to the treasure takes root in a specific event around 1905, the robbery of the Banco de Londres Tarapacá in the remote southern town of Rio Gallegos. While historical records of this robbery are frustratingly ambiguous, local folklore and persistent oral histories attribute it to Cassidy's gang. The story goes that the haul was substantial, a mix of gold coins and paper currency that would have been impossible to spend freely without drawing immediate suspicion in the small, tightly knit communities of Patagonia. With the law, both local and potentially the ever-present Pinkertons, closing in once more, they needed a secure place to stash their gains until the heat died down. Their solution was to hide the loot in a remote cave, a location known only to them, somewhere in the immense, uncharted wilderness of the Patagonian steppe. This is where history dissolves completely into myth. The Patagonian landscape is a character in this story in its own right, a breathtaking expanse of arid plains, dramatic granite peaks, and deep, isolated valleys battered by some of the strongest winds on Earth. Finding a single, unmarked cave in such a formidable territory is a task that borders on the impossible. The descriptions of the cache's location are vague, passed down through generations of storytellers. A cave near a distinctive rock formation, perhaps accessible only at low tide along a secluded stretch of coastline, or hidden within the labyrinthine folds of the Andes foothills. There are no reliable maps, no journal entries with clear coordinates from Butch or Sundance themselves. The entire story rests on the foundation of romantic outlaw mythology, the appealing idea that these two charismatic figures weren't just bandits, but clever adventurers who outsmarted the system and left a final prize for someone lucky enough to solve their last puzzle. This hasn't stopped generations of treasure hunters from trying. The dream of finding Butch Cassidy's lost cache has drawn expeditions to Patagonia for decades. These modern adventurers come armed with metal detectors, old photographs, and copies of letters Cassidy supposedly wrote, searching for any geographical clue that might match the sparse descriptions. They scour areas around former Welsh settlements, places where the outlaws were known to have found refuge, and investigate countless caves, many of which show signs of previous futile excavations. The challenges are immense: the sheer scale of the search area, the harsh and unpredictable weather, and the fact that any wooden crates or leather bags would have long since succumbed to the elements. The lack of any verified physical evidence, a single coin from the Rio Gallegos bank with a verifiable serial number, for instance, leaves the entire treasure firmly in the realm of legend. Ultimately, the true treasure of the Patagonian cave may not be gold at all, but the enduring power of the story itself. It perfectly encapsulates our fascination with the outlaw as a folk hero, a symbol of rebellion against authority. The image of Butch and Sundance having cheated death one last time, secreting their fortune in one of the most remote corners of the globe, is a far more satisfying ending for many than the historical record of their supposed deaths in Bolivia. It allows the legend to live on, inviting us to imagine that somewhere in that vast, beautiful, and lonely landscape, a piece of the Wild West still lies hidden, waiting for the day when the wind parts the grass just right to reveal the entrance to a forgotten cave. Just when it seems the story of Butch Cassidy fades into the mythic mists of Patagonia, we are pulled back to the undeniable, tangible reality of the sea, to a tale where the treasure is not merely rumored but meticulously documented, and the discovery was so monumental it changed the world of underwater archaeology forever. This is the saga of the Nostra Senora de Atocha, a vessel whose name is now synonymous with both staggering loss and legendary perseverance. In the autumn of 1622, the Spanish Empire was at the peak of its power, its wealth flowing from the mines of the New World across the Atlantic in heavily armed convoys. The Atocha was the almirante or rear-guard galleon of a 28-ship fleet, a massive 600-ton vessel tasked with carrying the most precious cargo. After loading in Havana, Cuba, its holds were filled with an inventory that reads like a fiction: 24 tons of silver bullion from Peru and Mexico, 180,000 silver coins, 125 gold bars and discs, and a wealth of copper, tobacco, and indigo. But perhaps most alluring were the private consignments, unregistered chests of exquisite gold jewelry, and most famously, a fortune in untreated emeralds from the Colombian mines, a king's ransom intended for the coffers of Madrid. The fleet set sail for Spain on September 4th, but just 2 days into the journey, it was caught in a monstrous hurricane off the Florida Keys. The Atocha, riding low in the water from its incredible weight of treasure, was slammed by 40-foot waves and hurricane-force winds. Its anchor cables snapped and the great galleon was driven onto a coral reef, its hull torn open. It sank quickly, taking with it 260 of its 265 passengers and crew. Only 5 survived, clinging to the ship's mizzenmast, which remained above water. The other ships in the fleet, also badly battered, were powerless to help. The exact location of the wreck was lost in the churning sea, and despite Spanish salvage attempts in the years that followed, the Atocha and its unimaginable wealth settled into the sandy bottom, its coordinates erased by time and tide. For over 3 centuries, it was nothing more than a ghost story, a legend of a lost galleon whispered among mariners. The modern hunt for the Atocha is a story of obsession, one man's unwavering belief against overwhelming odds. That man was Mel Fisher, a former chicken farmer from Indiana who became fascinated with treasure hunting. In 1969, after years of research in the Spanish archives in Seville, where he painstakingly translated ancient manifests and diaries, Fisher secured the rights to search for the Atocha. He assembled a crew, including his family, and began what would become a 16-year quest, a grueling ordeal marked by financial ruin, personal tragedy, and constant skepticism from the outside world. They used crude magnetometers and a pioneering system of mailboxes, large tubes placed over their boats' propellers to blow sand away from the seabed, to search a vast area of ocean known as the quicksands. The years dragged on with only tantalizing clues: a few silver coins, a gold bar, a bronze cannon. The breakthrough came in 1973 when they discovered a significant pile of silver bars, enough to prove they were on the right trail but not the main wreck site. They called this spot the Bank of Spain, yet the motherlode remained elusive. Then, in July 1975, tragedy struck. One of Fisher's search boats, the Northwind, capsized during the night, drowning his eldest son, Dirk, his daughter-in-law, Angel, and a diver. It was a devastating blow that would have broken most people, but Fisher, driven by what he called the Queen of all treasures, pressed on, his quest now also a memorial to his family. For another decade, the search continued, a daily grind of hope and disappointment. Finally, in the early morning hours of July 20th, 1985, the radio crackled to life with the most famous words in treasure hunting history: "Put away the charts, we've found it." The team, led by Fisher's son Kane, had located the main pile. What they uncovered was beyond anyone's wildest dreams. The Atocha motherlode was not just a shipwreck, it was a perfectly preserved cross-section of 17th century wealth. There were stacks of silver bars still neatly piled, chests of thousands of silver coins, exquisite gold chains and religious artifacts, and most spectacularly, the emeralds, dozens of them, some the size of walnuts in their natural crystalline forms, glowing with a deep, mesmerizing green. The total value was estimated at well over $400 million. But here is the twist that keeps the legend of the Atocha alive for modern treasure hunters. Mel Fisher's incredible discovery, as vast as it was, did not account for the entire registered cargo. The most detailed historical documents indicate that the Atocha was also carrying a number of specific, heavily laden chests of emeralds that have never been found. The theory, supported by the scatter pattern of the wreck, is that when the hurricane struck the stern castle, the tall structure at the back of the ship where the most valuable items were often stored was torn completely away from the main hull. The motherlode Fisher found was the lower cargo hold. The stern, with its separate treasure trove, was likely carried by the storm's fury for a considerable distance before sinking in a different yet undiscovered location. This means that a significant portion of the Atocha's registered treasure, particularly those chests of rare Muso emeralds, is still considered lost. The search continues to this day, with Fisher's company and other explorers using advanced side-scan sonar to scour the seabed, convinced that the final chapter of the Nostra Senora de Atocha has yet to be written, and that one of the greatest fortunes ever lost at sea still lies scattered and waiting on the ocean floor. Yet another treasure whose story begins with the fall of an empire, but this one holds a flame of profound spiritual significance. After exploring the potential treasure of the Second Temple listed on the Copper Scroll, we turn to one of its most famous and sacred artifacts, an object whose image is seared into historical memory, the golden menorah from the Second Temple in Jerusalem. This was no ordinary lampstand, crafted according to divine instruction as described in the Hebrew Bible. It was a single, solid piece of pure gold, featuring a central stem with 3 branches curving gracefully upward on each side, creating 7 lamps in total. It was a central symbol of Judaism, representing the light of God and the enduring spirit of the Jewish people, and it stood within the temple's Holy of Holies. Its fate is irrevocably tied to one of the most catastrophic events in Jewish history, the destruction of the Second Temple by the Roman legions under the future Emperor Titus in the year 70 of the Common Era. We know with absolute certainty that the menorah was taken by the Romans because its capture is immortalized in stone. Anyone who has visited Rome has likely seen the Arch of Titus, which stands proudly near the Roman Forum. Built to celebrate Titus's victory in Judea, one of its intricate reliefs depicts a triumphant procession. Roman soldiers are shown carrying away the spoils of the temple, and there, at the center of the scene, held aloft on a pole, is the unmistakable form of the 7-branched menorah. This stone carving is our last certain visual record of the artifact. Historical accounts, particularly from the Jewish historian Josephus, confirm that the menorah, along with other treasures like the solid gold table of showbread, were transported to Rome as the ultimate symbols of Roman supremacy. There, they were paraded through the streets before being placed on public display in the Templum Passus, or Temple of Peace, a magnificent museum-like complex built by Emperor Vespasian to house the plunder of his foreign conquests. For centuries, the golden menorah remained in Rome, a silent but powerful testament to a crushed rebellion and the might of the empire. But Rome's power was not eternal. The city that had spent centuries plundering the world would itself become a target. The next chapter in the menorah's story unfolds in the middle of the 5th century, when the Western Roman Empire was in a state of advanced decay. In the year 455, a Vandal fleet under King Gaiseric sailed from North Africa, entered the Tiber River, and sacked Rome itself. The Vandals, a Germanic tribe that had established a kingdom in Carthage, were known for their seafaring prowess and their ruthless efficiency. They spent a full 2 weeks systematically looting the city of its remaining wealth. According to the chronicles of the period, Gaiseric's men specifically targeted the treasures housed in the Templum Passus. including the spoils from Jerusalem that had been on display for nearly 400 years. The logical conclusion, supported by several historical sources, is that the golden menorah was loaded onto a Vandal ship along with countless other priceless artifacts to be taken back to the Vandal capital as the ultimate trophy. This is where the historical trail begins to fray, giving rise to two dominant yet equally unsatisfying theories. The first is a dramatic tale of loss at sea. The theory suggests that the ship or ships carrying the temple treasures encountered a violent storm en route to Carthage and sank somewhere in the Mediterranean. The waters between Italy and North Africa are notoriously treacherous, and the loss of a heavily laden vessel in a storm would have been a common occurrence. If this happened, the solid gold menorah, impervious to corrosion, would still be intact today, resting on the seabed amidst the broken timbers of a 1,500-year-old shipwreck. The allure of this possibility has captivated treasure hunters for generations, though the sheer vastness of the potential search area makes the prospect of discovery remote at best. The second, and perhaps more probable, theory is far less romantic but grounded in the harsh realities of history. The Vandal kingdom in North Africa was itself short-lived, conquered by the Byzantine Empire under the general Belisarius in the year 534. It is entirely possible that the menorah was seized once again and taken to Constantinople, the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. However, there is no definitive record of it arriving there or being placed on display. Without such a record, the most likely fate is that the menorah, being a massive quantity of pure, unadorned gold, was melted down. During the turbulent centuries that followed the fall of Rome, gold was fungible. A symbolic religious artifact was, to a desperate king or a cash-strapped emperor, simply bullion to be converted into coin to pay soldiers or fund wars. It could have been melted by the Vandals themselves to finance their kingdom, or by the Byzantines upon its recovery, or during any of the other countless conflicts that swept across the Mediterranean world. The tragic irony is profound. An object that survived the destruction of its own temple by a mighty empire may have ultimately been destroyed not by malice, but by mundane necessity, its sacred form lost forever to the crucible. The mystery of the menorah is thus a poignant one, a story of a light that was violently taken from its home, carried across the sea, and then, ultimately, extinguished, leaving behind only a stone image on a triumphal arch as a ghost of its former glory. Just when stories of sunken Spanish gold and outlaw caches seem to define the treasure hunter's dream, a different kind of legend calls from the heart of the American Southwest, one not of coins or jewels, but of a mountain of gold itself, hidden in a place so treacherous it has claimed countless lives. This is the story of the Lost Dutchman's gold mine, an enigma rooted in the fiery, arid landscape of Arizona's Superstition Mountains. The tale begins not with a Dutchman, but with a Mexican family. In the early 19th century, the Peralta family from Sonora was granted mining rights in the territory that would later become Arizona. According to the legend, they discovered an incredibly rich vein of gold in the Superstitions, a location so bountiful they could simply pry nuggets from the rock with their knives. For years, they conducted secret mining expeditions, hauling out vast quantities of ore, but their good fortune was destined for a brutal end. In the 1840s, the story goes, a large Peralta party was ambushed by Apache warriors who fiercely defended their sacred land. The miners were massacred, and the location of their mine was lost, fading into the lore of the region. Decades later, the central character of our story arrives, a German immigrant named Jacob Waltz. Born in the early 19th century, Waltz came to America seeking his fortune and eventually found his way to Arizona. It was here, the legend claims, that he either rediscovered the old Peralta mine or was shown its location by a surviving member of the family as a reward for an act of kindness. For years, Waltz was said to have made secret trips into the Superstitions, returning to Phoenix with his pockets full of extraordinarily high-grade gold ore. enough to finance his life but never enough to draw excessive attention. He was a quiet, secretive man, and his mysterious wealth fueled speculation. The crucial moment came in 1891 when Waltz, then in his 80s, fell gravely ill during a devastating flood in Phoenix. On his deathbed, tended by a neighbor named Julia Thomas, he is said to have finally revealed the mine's location, but his directions were not a clear map. They were a series of cryptic, poetic clues that have been analyzed and debated ever since. He spoke of a mine that could be seen from a specific landmark called the Weaver's Needle, but could not be reached by heading directly toward it. He mentioned a shadow, the shadow of the needle, that pointed to the entrance at a particular time of day. He described a trail you could ride a horse on part of the way, and a secret entrance facing east, concealed behind a large rock or a waterfall, a rare feature in that desert landscape. With his final breath, he gave the world a riddle wrapped in the geography of a deadly mountain range. The Superstition Mountains are a character in this story, and they are a hostile one. This is not a gentle, rolling landscape. It is a jagged wilderness of volcanic rock, deep canyons, searing summer heat that can exceed 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and a profound, isolating silence. The terrain is brutally unforgiving, with precipitous cliffs, confusing box canyons that all look the same, and an absence of reliable water sources. It is a place where a wrong turn can lead to disaster in minutes. This deadly environment has, for over a century, been the backdrop for a search that has consumed countless lives. Since the story of Waltz's deathbed confession spread, an estimated 8,000 people have tried their luck, and at least 600 are confirmed to have died in the attempt. Some have simply vanished without a trace, succumbing to the elements. Others have met more violent ends, with numerous unsolved murders and suspicious deaths attributed to the fierce competition and paranoia that the hunt for the mine inspires. The mountains seem to guard their secret jealously, earning a reputation as a place cursed by the Apache spirits or by the greed of men. This grim history forces us to confront the central question: is the lost Dutchman's mine real? There are three primary perspectives, each with its own compelling arguments. The first is that the entire story is a complete fabrication, a classic American tall tale that grew from a kernel of truth. That kernel might have been that Jacob Waltz was simply a shrewd prospector who knew how to find small, rich pockets of placer gold in the dry riverbeds, or that he had a hidden cache of ore from a legitimate but now played-out claim. His secretive nature and the dramatic setting of his deathbed confession created the perfect conditions for a myth to blossom, amplified by newspapers and dime novels eager for a sensational story. The second theory is that the mine was indeed real, but it was a small, exceptionally rich pocket that Waltz completely exhausted during his lifetime. Proponents of this idea argue that the lost mine was never lost at all. It was simply worked out, and all that remains is a small, insignificant hole that holds no more value, its location rendered unimportant by its emptiness. The third and most tantalizing theory is that the mine is genuinely out there, an undiscovered bonanza waiting for the right person to finally decipher Waltz's clues. Modern geology supports the possibility. The Superstition Mountains are volcanic in origin, and such formations can indeed host rich epithermal gold veins. The region has a history of mining, though nothing on the scale of the legendary Peralta strike. Those who believe point to the sheer consistency of the ore samples Waltz brought back, samples that were undeniably rich, and the persistence of the legend across generations. They argue that the mountains are so vast and complex that a single mine entrance could easily remain hidden, especially if it was naturally concealed by a rockfall or cleverly camouflaged. The search continues to this day, with modern adventurers using metal detectors, drones, and satellite imagery in their quest. Yet the mountain continues to keep its secret, leaving us with a quintessential American mystery that is as much about the lure of the unknown as it is about the promise of gold. From the harsh, sun-scorched peaks of the Superstition Mountains, we travel back in time to the heart of medieval Europe, to a tale not of a single mine, but of an entire financial empire whose sudden and violent end gave birth to one of history's most persistent treasure legends. This is the mystery of the lost treasure of the Knights Templar. To understand the scale of what might have been lost, we must first appreciate the incredible power this order wielded. Founded in the 12th century after the First Crusade, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon began with a humble mission: to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. But from these modest origins, they evolved into something far greater than a mere military unit. They became the world's first multinational corporation and a revolutionary banking power. Through a system of credit notes, a pilgrim could deposit funds at a Templar preceptory in London and withdraw the equivalent amount in Jerusalem, a service that protected them from highway robbers. This financial network, trusted by kings and commoners alike, along with vast land grants and donations from pious nobles across Europe, made the Templars staggeringly wealthy. They weren't just warriors, they were the bankers to crowns, amassing a fortune in gold, silver, and priceless religious relics that was rumored to rival that of many kingdoms. This immense concentration of wealth inevitably bred envy and fear, particularly in one man, King Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair. By the dawn of the 14th century, Philip was drowning in debt, much of it owed to the Templars themselves. Seeing their power as a threat to his own authority and coveting their riches to refill his depleted coffers, he devised a ruthless plan. On Friday, October 13, 1307, he sprung his trap. In a perfectly coordinated dawn raid across France, his officials simultaneously arrested hundreds of Knights Templar, including the Order's Grand Master, Jacques de Molay. The charges were shocking and salacious: heresy, blasphemy, idolatry, and obscene secret rituals. These accusations were almost certainly fabricated, extracted through brutal torture. The purpose was clear: to dismantle the order and seize its assets for the French crown. But when Philip's men rushed to the Templar headquarters at the Paris Temple, expecting to find vaults overflowing with treasure, they discovered something deeply unsettling. The main treasury was significantly depleted. The legendary wealth of the Templars had, for the most part, vanished. This moment is the genesis of the great mystery. Where did the treasure go? The most compelling theory suggests that the Templars, with their sophisticated intelligence network spanning Europe, had ample warning of the king's impending betrayal. In the days or weeks before the mass arrest, a convoy of Templar knights, fiercely loyal to the order, could have secretly transported the bulk of their movable wealth, chests of gold coins, silver ingots, and perhaps their most sacred relics, like the rumored head of Jesus or fragments of the true cross, away from Paris. The question of its destination has fueled centuries of speculation. One prominent theory points to the Templar fleet. The order owned a considerable number of ships, based primarily at their great port of La Rochelle on France's Atlantic coast. From there, a treasure fleet could have sailed to safer harbors. Some legends say they found refuge in Scotland, whose king, Robert the Bruce, was excommunicated at the time and would have had no reason to obey the Pope's order to arrest the Templars. There are even tantalizing suggestions that elements of the Templar order survived there, eventually influencing the formation of Scottish Freemasonry. Another possibility is Portugal, where the order was simply reconstituted under a new name, the Order of Christ, and continued its maritime explorations, later funding the voyages of Vasco da Gama. Did they take the treasure with them? The most adventurous and controversial theory, popularized in modern times, suggests the Templar fleet sailed across the Atlantic, reaching the shores of North America a century and a half before Columbus. Proponents of this idea point to alleged Templar symbols carved on stones in New England and Massachusetts as evidence that they established a secret settlement and buried their treasure in the New World, a theory that intertwines with the later mystery of Oak Island. The enduring power of this legend speaks to a deep fascination with the idea of a hidden knowledge and a fortune that escaped the grasp of a vengeful king. The treasure of the Knights Templar is more than just lost gold. It is a symbol of resilience, a secret that has sparked the imagination of countless seekers and cemented the Templars' place not just in history but in eternal mystery. But the tale of the Inca Empire's lost treasure presents a historical tragedy on an almost unimaginable scale. A story where the promised wealth was not merely plundered but deliberately vanished to deny the conquerors their ultimate prize. This saga begins in the high Andes of Peru in the year 1532, with a fateful meeting between two men from different worlds. On one side was the Inca Emperor Atahualpa, the Sapa Inca, ruler of the largest and richest empire in the Americas, fresh from a civil war victory and surrounded by his immense army. On the other was the Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro, leading a ragged band of fewer than 200 soldiers, driven by tales of golden cities and a hunger for glory that outweighed any fear. The audacious ambush at Cajamarca, where Pizarro's men used cavalry and steel to terrorize and capture the emperor, set in motion one of the most dramatic ransom demands in history. Seeing his divine ruler captured, Atahualpa's people were desperate. To secure his freedom, the emperor made Pizarro an offer that must have seemed like a fantasy. He promised to fill a large room measuring about 22 feet by 17 feet, once with gold objects up to a line as high as a man could reach, and then fill the same room twice more with silver. To the Spanish, who had never seen such concentrated wealth, this was an irresistible proposition. Pizarro agreed, and for months, a steady stream of treasure began to flow into Cajamarca from every corner of the empire. Exquisitely crafted gold statues of animals and gods, intricate ceremonial vessels, dazzling jewelry, and decorative plates from the temples of Cusco arrived by the load. The room was steadily filling, a glittering monument to the Incas' incredible metallurgical skills and the vast resources they commanded. The ransom was, by all accounts, paid in full, representing a fortune that historians estimate would be worth well over $50 billion in today's currency. But Pizarro, fearing the Inca emperor's enduring power and influence even from captivity, broke his word in the most brutal fashion. After receiving the entire ransom, he put Atahualpa on trial for trumped-up charges, including idolatry and plotting rebellion, and had him executed by garrote in July 1533. This act of treachery shattered the Inca world and sent a clear, chilling message to the remaining Inca leadership: the Spaniards could not be trusted. It is at this moment of ultimate betrayal that the legend of the greater lost treasure takes root. While the ransom was being gathered, a second, even more immense convoy of gold was reportedly on its way from the capital city of Cusco. This shipment was said to include the most sacred and valuable objects of the empire, including the priceless golden chain of Huascar, a link so massive it was said to require 200 men to carry it. As news of Atahualpa's murder spread, the commander of this convoy, the fierce and loyal Inca general WWII, made a fateful decision. Rather than deliver this ultimate prize to the treacherous Spaniards, he would hide it. WWII and his men are believed to have diverted the treasure train into the impossibly rugged and fog-shrouded Danganetes mountain range in what is now modern Ecuador. This is a landscape of sheer cliffs, deep, cloud-filled valleys, and treacherous Paramo wetlands, a place where the weather can change in an instant and dense fog can disorient even the most experienced traveler. According to the legend, WWII and his warriors concealed the vast treasure in a cave or a lake within these mountains, killing the porters who carried it to ensure its secret died with them. WWII himself continued to lead a fierce guerrilla war against the Spanish for 2 more years before he was finally captured, and despite being tortured, reportedly took the location of the treasure to his grave. The legend was given a tantalizing boost in the centuries that followed by the story of a Spanish miner named Valverde. who in the 16th century allegedly married into a local indigenous family and was shown the treasure's location by his new relatives. On his deathbed, he left a detailed but famously cryptic directions, a document that became known as the Derrotero de Valverde, which has both inspired and doomed countless expeditions with its vague references to landmarks like a lake that looks like a face and a trail that passes between two mountains. The allure of the lost Inca gold is profound. It represents not just the incalculable material wealth of a sophisticated civilization, but also a final act of defiance. The treasure was hidden not just from greed, but as a way to preserve the soul of the Inca Empire from the invaders who had so brutally desecrated it. For modern treasure hunters, the challenge is immense. The Danganates Range is a vertical wilderness where countless seekers have vanished or died, their searches thwarted by the harsh environment and the ambiguous clues. Some archaeologists and historians suggest that the legend may be just that, a powerful myth that grew from the trauma of conquest. They argue that the Spanish likely captured the vast majority of the empire's movable wealth. Yet the consistency of the story and the fact that a civilization capable of building Machu Picchu could certainly have engineered a masterful hiding place keeps the hope alive. The lost gold of the Incas stands as a ghost of a fallen world, a shadow of what was lost, waiting in the silent, misty peaks for a discovery that would rewrite the final chapter of the conquest. From the misty peaks of the Andes where the Inca treasure was hidden in an act of defiance, we sail to the humid, maze-like bayous of the American Gulf Coast, where the line between pirate and patriot was famously blurred. This is the story of Jean Lafitte, a man who cultivated an air of mystery so effectively that even his place of birth is debated, though he is most often remembered as a French pirate and privateer who became a legend of Louisiana. In the early 19th century, as the newly formed United States expanded and Spain clung to its crumbling empire in the Americas, the waters of the Gulf of Mexico became a hunting ground for opportunists. Lafitte was the master of this domain. He established a sophisticated and brazenly public base of operations on the island of Barataria Bay, situated in the wetlands south of New Orleans. This was not a hidden pirate cove in the traditional sense. It was a bustling, well-organized marketplace for contraband. Lafitte and his brother, Pierre, commanded a fleet of fast, well-armed ships that preyed heavily on Spanish merchant vessels, bringing their captured goods silver, spices, silk, and enslaved people to Barataria. From there, a network of merchants and auctioneers would funnel these illicit goods into the eager markets of New Orleans, making Lafitte not just a pirate, but the head of a thriving shadow economy. Lafitte's fortunes and his very fate changed dramatically with the outbreak of the War of 1812. In late 1814, the British military, seeking to capture the vital port city of New Orleans, approached Lafitte with a tempting offer. They promised him a commission in the Royal Navy, a pardon for his past crimes, and a substantial sum of money if he would use his knowledge of the local waterways to guide their troops. It was an offer designed to appeal to a man of his ambitions, but Lafitte made a stunning calculation. Instead of siding with the world's most powerful navy, he played for a different kind of prize. He alerted the American authorities to the British plans and, after a brief and strategic delay, offered his services and those of his seasoned cannoneers to General Andrew Jackson, who was desperately preparing the city's defenses. Jackson, a hardened soldier who initially despised Lafitte as a criminal, was pragmatic enough to accept the help. In the legendary Battle of New Orleans in January 1815, Lafitte and his men played a crucial role, manning artillery batteries with deadly precision against the advancing British forces. The American victory was decisive, and in its aftermath, both Lafitte and his men received a full pardon from President James Madison for their past crimes against the United States. The pirate had been transformed, at least officially, into a war hero. Yet, the life of a hero did not suit Jean Lafitte for long. After the war, he established a new base further west on Galveston Island in Spanish Texas, which he called Campeche. Here, he resumed his familiar trade, though under the thin guise of a privateer for the fledgling Republic of Cartagena. But the pressures of an expanding American Navy and diplomatic complaints from Spain eventually forced him to abandon Galveston in 1821. According to legend, he set fire to his settlement and sailed away in his flagship, the Pride, never to be seen again in the Gulf. It is in the aftermath of this dramatic exit that the most tantalizing chapter of his story begins, the legend of his buried treasure. With a fortune accumulated over more than a decade of piracy and facing a sudden need to flee, the theory goes that Lafitte would not have been able to take all of his wealth with him. He and his men are said to have buried caches of gold and silver coins, jewels, and other plunder all along the coast from the labyrinthine swamps of Louisiana to the sandy shores of Texas. The locations are as romantic as they are vague, hidden on islands whose names have changed, buried near landmarks like specific oak trees or under the foundations of old structures, or even sunk in the shallow waters of the bayous. The search for Lafitte's treasure has become a perennial pursuit for modern-day adventurers. For generations, treasure hunters have scoured places like the remains of his Barataria base, the stretches of coastline around Galveston, and the countless unnamed islands of the Gulf Intracoastal Waterway. They have used old maps, diary entries from Lafitte's associates, and metal detectors to follow the faint trail. Some have claimed small finds, a handful of Spanish coins, an old sword, that fuel the belief that a major discovery is still out there. However, the greatest challenge is the landscape itself. The Gulf Coast is a dynamic, shifting environment. Hurricanes routinely reshape the coastline, sandbars move, and the soft, silty ground of the marshes can swallow objects whole over time. A chest buried 2 centuries ago might now be under 10 feet of mud or a mile out to sea. Furthermore, Lafitte was a master of deception. He was known to have created false maps and spread misleading rumors to protect his hoards, meaning that many of the clues that tantalize hunters could have been deliberate red herrings. The enduring allure of Jean Lafitte's treasure is not just the promise of gold, but the romance of the man himself. A charismatic outlaw who outsmarted empires, fought for a nation that pardoned him, and then vanished into the fog of history, leaving behind a coastline whispering with secrets. Stepping away from the pirate haunts of the Gulf Coast, we enter a world where a treasure's value is measured not by weight or sparkle, but by the perfection of its craftsmanship and the weight of its history. In the realm of the samurai, the soul of the warrior was believed to reside in his sword, and no blades were more revered than those forged by the hands of a master. And among these masters, one name stands above all others: Goro Nudo Masamune, who worked in Japan during the late 13th and early 14th centuries. His katanas are not merely weapons, they are considered national treasures, sublime works of art that represent the pinnacle of the swordsmith's craft. The steel he produced through a painstaking process of folding and welding possessed a unique, mesmerizing grain pattern known as hoda, and a temper line, the hamon, that was said to resemble the ethereal beauty of stars in a night sky. To own a Masamune was to possess a symbol of ultimate authority and spiritual power, and the greatest of all these legendary blades was the Honjo Masamune. The sword's name itself tells a story of its legendary status. It is said to have been named for a general, Honjo Shigenaga, who, in the 16th century, faced an opponent wielding the Masamune blade in battle. In the fierce clash, Shigenaga's helmet was struck and split by the katana, but he survived and managed to claim the magnificent weapon as his prize. The blade was so exquisite that it became a symbol of the Tokugawa shogunate itself, passed down from shogun to shogun for generation after generation, a physical embodiment of their right to rule. For over 250 years, the Honjo Masamune was one of the most important objects in Japan, a revered heirloom kept in the shogunal palace. It survived civil wars, fires, and the tumultuous end of the feudal era, remaining a constant symbol of Japanese heritage and the soul of the samurai spirit. This unbroken lineage came to a catastrophic and mysterious end in the chaotic days following World War II. As part of the surrender terms and the subsequent occupation of Japan, American military authorities issued the Disarmament Directive, which ordered all Japanese citizens, including noble families, to surrender their weapons. This order was intended to demilitarize the nation, but it was interpreted broadly to include the vast collections of historic swords, which were viewed by the occupiers as instruments of war. For many Japanese families, this was a heart-wrenching decree, forcing them to hand over ancestral blades that were considered sacred family treasures. In December 1945, the Tokugawa family, like countless others, complied with the order. The last head of the main Tokugawa line, Imasa Tokugawa, brought a number of swords, including the priceless Honjo Masamune, to a local police station in Tokyo. The swords were logged, collected, and then handed over to the American authorities. And from that moment, the Honjo Masamune, a blade that had survived for 6 centuries, vanished without a trace. The most widely accepted and deeply frustrating theory is that the sword was collected along with thousands of others by an American serviceman who was utterly unaware of its profound cultural and historical significance. To an untrained eye, a Japanese sword in its plain wooden scabbard or saya might look like just another military souvenir. The collection and redistribution process was haphazard. Some swords were destroyed, others were shipped back to the United States as war trophies, and many were simply lost in the bureaucratic shuffle. The Honjo Masamune, lacking the flamboyant decorations of some later ceremonial blades, could have easily been mistaken for a standard-issue officer's katana. It is entirely possible that it was packed in a footlocker, shipped home to America, and presented as a curious trophy from the war. The soldier who owned it might have passed it down to his family, who, for decades, have had no idea that they possess one of the most important lost artifacts of Japanese history, an object whose value to collectors and the Japanese nation would be virtually incalculable. This possibility has fueled a quiet but persistent international search for decades. Art historians, specialists in Japanese arms and armor, and officials from the Japanese government have all kept a watchful eye on auction houses and private collections, hoping for a sign. The unique characteristics of a Masamune blade, the specific pattern of the steel grain, the shape of the tang or nakego where the swordsmith's signature or mei would be inscribed, are unmistakable to an expert. The hope is that one day, during an estate appraisal or a casual inquiry, the blade will be pulled from its scabbard and recognized for what it is. The mystery of the Honjo Masamune is a poignant reminder of the collateral damage of war, the loss of cultural identity that can occur in the fog of peace. It is a story of a treasure that may not be hidden in a cave or at the bottom of the sea, but could be sitting in an attic in Kansas or a basement in Ohio. A silent, sleeping legend waiting for the moment its true name is called once more. While the legend of Jean Lafitte speaks to treasures hidden along swampy shores, our next story takes us back into the deep, where an entire fortune vanished into the cold Atlantic, earning a nickname that captures its almost mythical status, the El Dorado of the seas. This is the saga of the Merchant Royal, an English merchant ship whose loss in 1641 represents one of the most valuable shipwrecks never recovered. The story begins not with a military conquest, but with the complex and often clandestine world of 17th century international finance. England and Spain were technically at peace, but that didn't stop enterprising English merchants from profiting from Spain's ongoing wars. The Merchant Royal, under Captain John Limbry, was engaged in this lucrative trade. Its official mission was to transport goods, but it had also been hired for a secret, high-stakes task to carry an immense payroll for the Spanish army. After a lengthy stay in Cadiz, Spain, the ship was loaded with a cargo so valuable it strained belief. Historical records and manifests describe a treasure that included 100,000 pounds of gold, an astonishing amount of precious metal, along with nearly 400 bars of silver freshly minted in Mexico and a fortune in pearls and other jewels. This incredible wealth was intended to pay the 30,000 soldiers of Spain's Army of Flanders, a crucial force in the brutal 80 Years' War. The ship itself was also carrying a substantial amount of private merchant gold, making its total cargo worth an estimated $1.5 billion in today's currency. The Merchant Royal set sail from Cadiz in late August 1641, accompanied by its sister ship, the Dover Merchant. The voyage home to England should have been routine, but as they approached the southwestern tip of England, the weather turned monstrous. A fierce storm blew in from the Atlantic, battering the ships for days. The Merchant Royal, which Captain Limbry himself had noted was in poor condition and prone to leaking, began to take on water at an alarming rate. The ship's pumps worked frantically but could not keep up with the influx of the sea. The final catastrophic failure occurred when the hull's framing suddenly gave way. The ship foundered and sank quickly off the coast of Cornwall near the Isles of Scilly. Of the 58 crewmen on board, only 18 managed to escape in a small boat. Captain Limbry and 39 others were lost to the waves, along with the entire unimaginable treasure. The Dover Merchant survived the storm but could do nothing to save its sister ship. The El Dorado of the seas had sunk to the bottom in deep water, its exact location swallowed by the storm and the powerful currents of the area. For centuries, the wreck was little more than a mariner's ghost story, a tantalizing legend that drew occasional treasure hunters but remained elusive due to the depth and difficulty of the search area. That changed dramatically in 2019 when the American seabed exploration company Odyssey Marine Exploration made a stunning announcement. While searching for another shipwreck, their advanced remote-operated vehicles had located a wreck site in international waters about 60 miles off the coast of Cornwall that they believed, with a high degree of probability, to be the Merchant Royal. The evidence was compelling. Sonar imagery showed a wreck of the appropriate size and era, and their initial investigations revealed a scatter of 17th century artifacts, including anchors and cannons that matched the type a merchant vessel like the Merchant Royal would have carried. Most tantalizingly, they reported the presence of a large quantity of sediment-covered objects that could very well be the long-lost silver bars. The discovery sent ripples of excitement through the worlds of archaeology and treasure hunting. However, identifying the wreck was only the first step on a long and legally fraught path. The location of the wreck site immediately triggered a complex international dispute. While the ship was English, the primary treasure was Spanish state property intended for paying an army. Furthermore, the wreck lies in international waters, which places it under the jurisdiction of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. This creates a tangled web of potential claims. The British government could assert ownership as the flag state of the vessel. The Spanish government has a powerful claim to the treasure itself, arguing it was never delivered and remains their national property. Odyssey Marine Exploration, having invested millions in the search, would claim a salvage rights award under maritime law. This situation is reminiscent of the legal battles surrounding the San Jose, but with the added complication of the wreck being outside any single nation's territorial waters. Negotiations between these parties are delicate and ongoing, with any recovery operation frozen until agreements are reached. Beyond the courtroom, the physical challenges of recovering the treasure are immense. The wreck lies under nearly a mile of water, a depth that places it in the same category as the Titanic. Working at such extreme pressures requires highly specialized and incredibly expensive remotely operated vehicles, and the process of carefully excavating a centuries-old wooden shipwreck buried in sediment is painstakingly slow. The environment is also treacherous, with strong currents and poor visibility making each dive a complex engineering feat. Any recovery would need to be conducted with archaeological precision to preserve the historical context of the find, not as a simple treasure grab. The Merchant Royal, therefore, remains in a state of limbo, found but not yet touched. Its billion-dollar cargo, a shimmering prize visible on sonar screens, yet protected by the immense depth of the ocean and the even deeper complexities of international law, a ghost of 17th century finance waiting for the world to decide its fate. From the deep-sea saga of the Merchant Royal, we ascend into a world of unparalleled opulence and delicate artistry, a world where treasure was not merely possessed but worn as a symbol of absolute power and intimate affection. This is the story of the Imperial Fabergé eggs, perhaps the most exquisite lost treasures to emerge from the fall of a great empire. In the grand tapestry of Russian history, the name Fabergé represents the pinnacle of the jeweler's art. The mastermind behind these creations was Peter Carl Fabergé, a man whose goldsmith to the imperial court title was earned through sheer genius. The tradition began in 1885 when Tsar Alexander III commissioned a special Easter gift for his wife, the Tsarina Maria Fedorovna. The first egg, known as the hen egg, appeared simple on the outside, a white enamel shell that looked like a real egg, but its magic was revealed upon opening. Inside was a yolk of matte gold, which itself opened to reveal a golden hen, and within the hen were a miniature diamond replica of the imperial crown and a tiny ruby pendant. This theme of nested surprises, or surprises as Fabergé called them, became the hallmark of the series. The Tsarina was so delighted that Alexander III made it an annual tradition, a tradition his son, Nicholas II, would continue for both his mother and his own wife, Alexandra. Each egg was a unique masterpiece, taking a team of the finest craftsmen a full year or more to complete. They were not just jeweled baubles, they were intricate feats of micro-engineering and artistic expression. The materials were the most precious on Earth: gold, silver, platinum, and a kaleidoscope of gemstones, but their true value lay in the craftsmanship. Consider the Trans-Siberian Railway egg, created in 1900, which celebrated the completion of the Great Railway. Its surprise was a precise, 1-foot-long model of the Siberian Express train, crafted in gold and platinum, with a winding key that set the tiny locomotive in motion. Or the Moscow Kremlin egg, an architectural marvel that recreated the grandeur of the Kremlin itself. Of the 50 imperial eggs created, each told a story of a coronation, a naval victory, a family milestone, making them a chronicle of the Romanov dynasty's final decades, rendered in gems and enamel. This golden age came to a violent and abrupt end with the Russian Revolution of 1917. The Romanov family was overthrown, and Nicholas II, along with his wife and children, was executed. The Bolsheviks, seizing the assets of the state, stormed the imperial palaces and confiscated everything, including the Fabergé eggs. Many were stored in the Kremlin armory, but to the new Soviet government, struggling to fund a revolution and a civil war, they were not cultural treasures, they were capital. In the 1920s, the Soviet Ministry of Finance made a cold, pragmatic decision. They began selling off the imperial treasures to raise hard currency from the West. Art dealers like Armand Hammer acted as intermediaries, and eggs were sold to wealthy collectors, many in America, for what were then considered substantial sums but which now seem like paltry amounts. It is through these sales that most of the known eggs found their way into museums and private collections, like that of Malcolm Forbes, whose collection later formed the core of the Fabergé Museum in St. Petersburg. But here is where the mystery takes hold. While 43 of the 50 imperial eggs have been accounted for, the whereabouts of 7 remain a complete mystery. The fate of these lost eggs is one of the great puzzles of the art world. The most tragic possibility is that they were simply destroyed in the chaos of the revolution or during the subsequent world wars. They could have been melted down for their bullion value by officials who saw no artistic worth in them, or lost in the bombing of a warehouse or a private collection. Yet the more tantalizing theory, the one that keeps art historians and detectives awake at night, is that they survived. it is entirely possible that some eggs were sold not through official channels but in private, undocumented transactions to discreet collectors who wished to remain anonymous. They could have been smuggled out of Russia by White Army sympathizers or enterprising individuals who recognized their value. If this happened, these masterpieces could be sitting in a bank vault or a private display case somewhere in the world, their true identity unknown even to their current owners. The hunt for the lost Fabergé eggs is a unique kind of treasure hunt, one that plays out in auction houses, archives, and the basements of old mansions. Every so often, a potential lead emerges. In 2012, an American scrap metal dealer made headlines when he purchased a gold and jeweled object at a flea market for $14,000, thinking he might melt it down for its components. After a frantic internet search, he began to suspect he had, in fact, found the long-lost third imperial Easter egg, made for Alexander III in 1887. Experts were flown in, and after intense scrutiny, it was authenticated. The egg, missing for nearly a century, was valued at over $33 million. This incredible story proves that such discoveries are possible, that a masterpiece can vanish into obscurity only to resurface in the most unlikely of places. For every egg that has been found, however, 7 are still missing. Each is known by its name from Fabergé's ledgers: the cherub with chariot egg, the royal Danish egg, the necessaire egg, ghosts of a vanished world. Their survival would mean that one of the most intimate and beautiful symbols of Imperial Russia still exists, a secret waiting for the right moment to hatch back into the light. Now we travel from the imperial splendor of Russia to a windswept, wooded island off the coast of Nova Scotia, a place shrouded in legend and said to be protected by a deadly curse. This is the enduring, all-consuming mystery of the Oak Island Money Pit, a puzzle that has consumed treasure hunters for over 200 years, swallowing fortunes and claiming lives in a quest that has yielded everything except the treasure itself. The story begins in 1795 with a simple discovery by a teenager named Daniel Magines. Exploring the then uninhabited island, he came upon a curious circular depression in the ground, and hanging directly above it from an old oak tree's limb was a worn ship's tackle block. It looked as if it had been used for lowering something heavy into a shaft below. Convinced he had found evidence of pirate activity, Magines returned the next day with 2 friends and they began to dig. What they uncovered was no simple hole. Just a few feet down, they hit a layer of flagstones not native to the island. 10 feet deeper, they encountered a platform of solid oak logs firmly set into the walls of the shaft. At 20 and 30 feet, they found more oak platforms. This was no natural sinkhole. It was a complex man-made structure, and it was far deeper than they could excavate with hand tools. They had to abandon their dig, but they had ignited a legend. Someone, at some point in history, had gone to an incredible amount of trouble to bury something very valuable and very deep on Oak Island. This initial discovery was only the beginning of the mystery, as subsequent expeditions funded by wealthy syndicates attempted to reach the bottom of the shaft. They encountered a series of diabolical, ingenious booby traps. At around 90 feet, treasure hunters made a tantalizing find, a large flat stone inscribed with mysterious, cryptic symbols. While the stone itself later vanished, copies of the inscription were made, and some claimed it translated to a message reading, 40 feet below, £2 million are buried. But the true engineering marvel, and the source of the pit's deadly reputation, was discovered just 10 feet below that stone. Probes sent down struck not one but several layers of spruce logs. And when workers broke through this barrier, they triggered a catastrophic flood. Seawater rushed up the shaft from 2 ingeniously engineered flood tunnels, which connected the money pit to the ocean via a nearby beach. These tunnels were designed to fill any excavation attempt with water, making it impossible to reach the bottom. This was no mere storage hole. It was a brilliantly conceived security system, far beyond the capability of casual pirates. It suggested the involvement of sophisticated engineers and a secret that was deemed worth protecting at any cost. This complexity is precisely what has fueled such wild and varied theories about what the pit might contain. The simplest explanation points to pirates. Captain William Kidd or the notorious Blackbeard are frequent candidates, with the idea that they needed a secure place to hide a massive, plundered hoard. But would pirates have the patience or the engineering knowledge to construct such an elaborate vault? This question has led to more elaborate speculations. One compelling theory involves the lost works of Sir Francis Bacon. Proponents suggest that Bacon, a philosopher and playwright, was the true author of Shakespeare's works, and that original manuscripts were hidden in the pit by a secret society like the Rosicrucians to preserve them. Others believe the treasure is royal, specifically the missing jewels of Marie Antoinette. The story goes that during the French Revolution, the Queen's lady-in-waiting, fleeing to Canada, managed to smuggle the Queen's jewels and perhaps even other royal treasures, which were then buried for safekeeping. The most breathtaking theory of all connects the pit to the treasures we've discussed earlier in our journey, that it contains religious artifacts of immense significance, perhaps even the Ark of the Covenant or parts of the dismantled Temple of Jerusalem, hidden by the Knights Templar who allegedly fled to North America with their sacred relics a century before Columbus. Each theory attempts to match the scale of the engineering to the presumed value of the prize. For decades, the search was characterized by sporadic, often reckless efforts that led to tragedy. The quest claimed its first life in the 1860s when a boiler on a pumping apparatus exploded. In 1897, a man fell to his death. The most devastating incident occurred in 1965, when 4 men were killed after being overcome by methane gas fumes in a shaft. The island seemed to be living up to its alleged curse that 7 men must die before the treasure can be found. The modern era of the hunt, however, has been defined by a more methodical, technologically advanced approach, brought into millions of homes through the History Channel series The Curse of Oak Island. At the center of this new chapter are brothers Rick and Marty Lagina, who first became fascinated by the mystery as children after reading about it in a magazine. In 2006, they purchased a controlling interest in the island and have since embarked on the most comprehensive and well-funded excavation in history. The Lagina brothers' operation is a world away from the pickaxes and shovels of the past. They employ a small army of geologists, archaeologists, and engineers, and utilize cutting-edge technology like sonic drilling, which extracts core samples without collapsing the fragile underground structures, and advanced metal detection scanning that can map subterranean anomalies. Their work has uncovered a staggering array of clues that both deepen the mystery and suggest there is something of historical importance on the island. They have found a Spanish copper coin dating to the 17th century, a medieval lead cross, and pieces of human-worked wood and leather that have been carbon-dated to long before the island's official settlement. Most dramatically, they have used underwater cameras to explore a mysterious, man-made shaft known as Borehole 10X, where they filmed what appear to be antique chests and even a human hand floating in the murky water far below the island. While they have not yet recovered the legendary treasure chest, their efforts have proven that Oak Island is not a barren rock. It is an archaeological site of immense complexity, crisscrossed with tunnels, wharves, and structures that point to a significant, sustained effort by someone in the distant past. The treasure of Oak Island may not be a single chest of gold, but a historical revelation about who reached North America and what they were doing there centuries before recorded history. The hunt continues, a slow, expensive, and meticulous process, a testament to the enduring power of a mystery that began with a curious depression in the ground and a block hanging from an oak tree, a mystery that continues to whisper of a secret just out of reach. Yet another treasure was lost not to the ravages of time or the greed of conquerors, but to the cruel irony of modern convenience. This is the story of the sarcophagus of the pharaoh Menkauhor, a relic that survived for over 4,000 years only to vanish during a routine voyage across the sea. Menkaure was the builder of the smallest of the three great pyramids at Giza, but by no means the least significant. His pyramid complex was a testament to the enduring power of the Old Kingdom, and deep within its core lay the king's burial chamber, a sanctuary designed for eternity. In 1837, a team of British explorers led by Colonel Howard Vyse, an enthusiastic if sometimes heavy-handed archaeologist, was working at Giza. Vyse's methods were typical of his era, relying more on dynamite and brute force than on delicate precision. It was during his excavation of Menkaure's pyramid that his men made a stunning discovery. Behind a wall of massive granite blocks, they found the pharaoh's original burial chamber, and within it, a magnificent sarcophagus. This was no plain stone box. Carved from a single block of beautiful dark gray basalt, it was intricately decorated with the distinctive panel design known as the palace facade pattern, a symbolic representation of the royal residence. Most importantly, it bore an inscription confirming it was made for Menkaure himself. It was a find of immense archaeological significance, the only sarcophagus from a Giza pyramid known to have survived from the Old Kingdom period. Filled with triumph, Vyse made arrangements to ship this priceless treasure back to England, where it would be the crown jewel of the British Museum's Egyptian collection. The sarcophagus was carefully crated and loaded aboard the merchant vessel Beatrice, which set sail from Alexandria in the autumn of 1838. The journey across the Mediterranean should have been straightforward, but history is filled with such should-haves. As the Beatrice navigated the waters off the coast of Spain near the port of Cartagena, it was caught in a violent and unexpected storm. The ship was driven onto rocks and foundered. While the crew reportedly managed to escape with their lives, the cargo was a total loss. The heavy crate containing the sarcophagus of Menkaure sank like a stone, plunging down into the deep waters of the Mediterranean. In an instant, an object that had rested secure in its pyramid since the dawn of civilization was gone, swallowed by the sea it never should have crossed. The loss is a profound tragedy for Egyptology. That sarcophagus was a direct, tangible link to a specific pharaoh from the age of the pyramid builders. Its unique style and inscription could have provided invaluable insights into the funerary practices and artistic conventions of the Fourth Dynasty. Unlike the treasures of Tutankhamun, which come from a much later period, Menkaure's burial equipment would have represented the zenith of the Old Kingdom. The irony is almost too much to bear. The very act of discovering and preserving the artifact for Western scholarship is what led to its destruction. It survived the collapse of the Old Kingdom, the tomb robbers of antiquity, and the shifting sands of 4 millennia, only to be lost to a simple shipping accident in the 19th century. This story serves as a sobering lesson in the history of archaeology, highlighting the sometimes catastrophic gap between the thrill of discovery and the responsibility of preservation. Yet, this story may not have a final ending. The sarcophagus, being made of dense basalt stone, would have been incredibly resilient to the corrosive effects of seawater. Unlike a wooden shipwreck that would rot away, the stone coffin likely remains intact on the seabed, a silent, solitary monument in the deep. The potential for its recovery, while remote, is not zero. The general area of the shipwreck is known, and modern marine archaeology has the technology, side-scan sonar and remotely operated vehicles, to search for and potentially identify such a distinct object. The challenge, of course, is the vastness of the search area and the depth of the water. Furthermore, any recovery effort would be fraught with legal and ethical complexities involving Spanish, Egyptian, and British authorities. But the possibility remains that one day, the dark, carved stone of Menkaure's sarcophagus could be raised from the darkness, completing a journey that was interrupted nearly 2 centuries ago, and finally bringing the pharaoh's vessel home. But the frantic efforts to hide the treasure of the Third Reich were not confined to the amber-walled rooms of Königsberg Castle. As the Allied noose tightened in the spring of 1945, a more desperate, chaotic operation was unfolding deep within the remote Austrian Alps. Our journey now takes us to a place of stark, breathtaking beauty that conceals a dark and murky secret, Lake Toplitz. Nestled in the Salzkammergut region, this mountain lake is not like the tranquil holiday destinations nearby. It is a forbidding body of water over 300 feet deep, with steep, wooded shores that plunge directly into the water. Its most notorious feature lies beneath the surface, a tangled, impenetrable layer of sunken logs, a natural labyrinth created by centuries of timber floating operations. The water is frigid year-round, and the depths are pitch black, creating an environment so hostile that it became the perfect natural vault for the Nazis' most sensitive and illicit secrets. The legend of Lake Toplitz is inextricably linked to one of the most audacious and bizarre economic warfare schemes in history, Operation Bernhard. As the war turned against Germany, the SS, under the direction of Heinrich Himmler, devised a plan to destabilize the British economy by flooding the market with perfect counterfeit British banknotes. The operation was run with terrifying efficiency from the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, where a team of imprisoned printers, engravers, and bankers was forced to produce millions of pounds in flawless fake currency. The plan was remarkably successful. The counterfeit notes were so good they were virtually indistinguishable from the real thing, and were used to pay for crucial war materials and to fund German intelligence operations across Europe. By the end of the war, the Nazis had produced an estimated £132 million in counterfeit money, a staggering sum that, if successfully deployed, could have caused economic chaos. But with the advance of the Red Army and Allied forces in 1945, the SS was faced with a terrible problem: what to do with the evidence of this massive crime, along with the vast quantities of gold, jewels, and other looted treasure they had accumulated. Lake Toplitz, remote and difficult to access, was chosen as a dumping ground. The theory, supported by numerous eyewitness accounts from locals and former SS officers, is that in the final days of the war, trucks arrived at the lake under cover of darkness. Soldiers unloaded heavy, sealed crates onto boats, which were then rowed to the deepest part of the lake, where the boxes were dumped overboard, their contents sinking down through the treacherous forest of sunken logs to settle on the silty bottom. The loot was rumored to include not only the remaining stocks of counterfeit notes and the printing plates needed to make more, but also gold bullion from the Reichsbank, priceless art looted from Jewish collections, and perhaps even sensitive documents listing the names of Nazi sympathizers and sleeper agents around the world. The post-war searches began almost immediately, fueled by these tantalizing rumors. The first significant expedition was launched in 1959 by a German magazine, which did indeed make a chilling discovery. Divers managed to recover several sealed boxes from the lake bed. When they were pried open, they contained millions of pounds in counterfeit British notes, along with the infamous printing plates for Operation Bernhard. This proved that the core of the legend was true. The lake had been used as an SS dumping ground. But it also raised a more compelling question. If they went to the trouble of hiding the counterfeit money, what else did they sink alongside it? Subsequent searches, often funded by private treasure hunters, have turned up other eerie relics, crates of experimental rockets, parts for V-2 flying bombs, and other wartime technology that the Nazis wanted to keep from falling into Allied hands. These finds confirmed Lake Toplitz's role as a secret Nazi archive, but the ultimate prize, the lost gold, has remained frustratingly elusive. The challenges of searching Lake Toplitz are immense, almost designed to guard its secrets. The underwater forest of logs is a deadly death trap for divers, with shifting trunks that can trap a person in an instant. The cold, dark water and the deep silt that blankets the bottom make visibility nearly zero and complicate the use of sonar equipment. In 2000, a joint expedition from CBS's 60 Minutes and the American National Geographic Society used a remote-controlled submarine to film the lakebed. Their footage revealed a landscape littered with debris, but no definitive sign of gold bars. The sheer difficulty of the environment has led some experts to speculate that if the gold is there, it may have sunk into the deep, soft sediment, becoming buried under feet of mud and effectively lost forever. Yet, the possibility that billions of dollars in Nazi gold still rests in the icy darkness continues to draw expeditions, each one hoping to be the one that finally pulls the ultimate prize from the lake's cold, dark grasp, a stark reminder of a regime that tried to hide the evidence of its crimes in the most remote corners of the earth. But from the dark, silent depths of an Austrian lake, we now turn to the tempest-tossed waters of the North Sea, where the fate of a single ship is tied to the financial fate of nations, and its loss gave rise to one of the most unique traditions in the world of high finance. This is the story of the treasure of the HMS Lutine, a tale where the most famous relic recovered isn't a gold bar or a glittering gem, but a solitary bell whose toll has become a voice of fate itself. The scene is set in the autumn of 1799, at the height of the French Revolutionary Wars. Britain was leading the charge against the French Republic, and a crucial part of that effort involved bankrolling its allies on the continent. The HMS Lutine, a fast and powerful frigate originally built for the French Navy but captured by the British, was chosen for a mission of immense sensitivity and value. Its holds were loaded with a staggering shipment of gold and silver bullion and coins, a financial lifeline intended for the ports of Hamburg to support the armies battling Napoleon. The exact value of the cargo has been debated for centuries, but contemporary records and Lloyd's of London's own ledgers suggest a consignment worth today's equivalent of many billions of dollars. This was not merely a shipment, it was a massive international loan in physical form, a fortune upon which the momentum of a war could turn. The Lutine set sail from Great Yarmouth on October 9, 1799, sailing into what would become a legendary North Sea gale. The storm was of a ferocity that seasoned sailors still spoke of with dread decades later, as the frigate battled the hurricane-force winds and towering waves off the coast of the Netherlands near the island of Terschelling. Its navigators made a fatal miscalculation. Instead of finding the safe, deep water channel, the Lutine was driven onto a particularly treacherous sandbank known as the Flyers. The ship struck the sand with tremendous force and, pounded by the relentless waves, quickly broke apart. Of the nearly 250 souls on board, there was only a single survivor, a passenger who managed to cling to wreckage and was washed ashore. He lived just long enough to confirm the ship's identity before succumbing to his ordeal. The Lutine, its crew, and its astronomical treasure had been swallowed by the sea in a single night of violent weather. The most immediate impact of this disaster was felt not on a battlefield, but in the underwriting room of Lloyd's of London. The famed insurance market had insured the vast majority of the Lutine's cargo. The loss was so colossal that it threatened to bankrupt many of the individual underwriters who had taken on shares of the risk. In a remarkable display of collective responsibility, the entire community at Lloyd's banded together to honor the policies in full, a decision that cemented its reputation for integrity and solidified its central role in global finance. It was in the aftermath of this event that the most enduring symbol of the wreck emerged. In 1858, a Dutch salvage team working on the stubborn wreck site made a significant find. They didn't recover gold, they recovered the ship's bell. It was a large cast bronze bell, and when it was pulled from the sands, the word Lutine was still clearly visible upon it. The bell was presented to Lloyd's, where it was hung in the underwriting room, and it was given a solemn purpose. It would be rung on momentous occasions, once to announce bad news, such as the loss of a ship, and twice for good news, like the safe arrival of a vessel that had been overdue. The sound of the Lutine bell became a voice of suspense and resolution, a direct echo of the ship whose loss had so profoundly shaped the institution. But what of the treasure itself? The wreck of the Lutine proved to be an incredibly challenging and elusive target for salvors. The ship had sunk into the shifting sands of the Flyer's sandbank, a dynamic underwater landscape that constantly moves and reshapes itself with the tides and storms. Early salvage attempts by the Dutch began almost immediately, and they did manage to recover a portion of the cargo. Over the decades, various operations using diving bells and early hard hat diving suits brought up a number of gold and silver bars, as well as thousands of gold coins. These recoveries proved the stories true, but they also revealed the frustrating nature of the site. The wreck was being slowly buried and scattered by the very environment that had claimed it. The sands would grant a glimpse of the prize, only to cover it up again, seemingly at will. The most determined salvage effort was undertaken in the 20th century by a German salvage company. For nearly 2 decades, from the 1920s to the 1930s, they employed cutter suction dredges, massive industrial equipment that essentially mined the sandbank in an attempt to reach the main body of the wreck. This brutal method was successful to a degree. They recovered several hundred more gold bars and a large quantity of silver, but at a tremendous cost. The violent process likely destroyed much of the historical integrity of the site, scattering artifacts and further complicating the task of locating the remaining treasure. The German operation claimed to have exhausted the site, but many experts and treasure hunters remain deeply skeptical. The original manifests and Lloyd's records suggest that only a fraction of the total cargo, perhaps as little as 20%, has ever been recovered. The sheer scale of the initial shipment means that even a small percentage remaining would represent a fortune worth hundreds of millions, if not over $1 billion today. The challenge is that the remaining bullion is not sitting in a neat pile. It is believed to be scattered over a wide area, buried deep beneath the sand in a location that is notoriously difficult and dangerous to work. Modern salvage technology, including sophisticated magnetometers and precision dredging, could theoretically succeed where past efforts failed, but the legal ownership of any future finds is a complex web involving the British and Dutch governments, and of course, the insurers at Lloyd's who paid the claim over 2 centuries ago. The treasure of the Lutine therefore remains in a state of suspension, a fortune scattered across a treacherous seabed, its story kept alive by the periodic, solemn ring of a bell in London, a sound that continues to speak of both a historic loss and the enduring hope of discovery. While the legend of El Dorado has become a blanket term for any rumored city of gold in the Americas, one name stands apart with a specific and persistent history: the lost city of Paititi. This was not a vague myth of a golden man, but a very real place described in colonial-era chronicles as the final, secret refuge of the Inca elite after their empire collapsed. As Spanish conquistadors solidified their control over the Andes, the remnants of the royal court, along with the mummified bodies of their ancestors and the empire's most sacred treasures, are said to have fled east, vanishing into the vast, uncharted rainforests that sprawled from the foothills of the Andes into the Amazon basin. Paititi was believed to be their sanctuary, a city built in a hidden mountain valley, its temples and palaces overflowing with the gold that had been saved from the invaders. It's crucial to distinguish this from the already discovered Machu Picchu. That magnificent citadel was an estate for Inca royalty, abandoned and reclaimed by the forest, but it was not the final capital of a fleeing civilization. Paititi, in contrast, represents the ultimate prize, the last stronghold where Inca culture, religion, and wealth were thought to have been preserved in secret. The evidence for Paititi's existence is rooted in tantalizing clues from the Spanish colonial period itself. In the early 1600s, missionary accounts from Jesuits working among indigenous tribes in the remote regions of what is now southeastern Peru and northern Bolivia tell of encounters with powerful, wealthy chiefs who claimed descent from the Incas. One particularly compelling document is the testimony of a missionary named Andrea Lopez, who in 1690 described a large city rich in gold, silver, and jewels called Paititi, which he had heard of from local inhabitants. Even more intriguing are the persistent stories of an Inca road that led east from the known empire into the jungle, a route that supposedly ended at this hidden city. These fragmentary reports created a map of whispers, pointing generations of explorers toward the most formidable and unexplored terrain on the continent. The cloud forests and deep river valleys where the Andes meet the Amazon, a place of sheer cliffs, dense vegetation, and isolated tribes. Modern technology has transformed the search for Paititi from a pure adventure into a sophisticated archaeological investigation. Where early 20th century explorers relied on machetes and sheer determination, today's seekers use satellite imagery and LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. This remarkable technology can effectively see through the dense forest canopy by firing millions of laser pulses from an aircraft and measuring their return. The result is a highly detailed, three-dimensional map of the ground surface, revealing human-made structures like terraces, plazas, and pyramids that are completely invisible to the naked eye from above. In recent years, LiDAR surveys in the remote Madre de Dios region of Peru have indeed revealed extensive, previously unknown settlements, with geometric patterns and large earthworks that suggest complex, pre-Columbian societies flourished in areas long thought to be pristine wilderness. While none of these sites have yet been conclusively identified as the legendary Paititi, each discovery proves that the rainforest holds secrets on a scale that matches the old stories. The ongoing quest is led by a new generation of explorers, a mix of archaeologists, historians, and documentary filmmakers who trek into these isolated zones, following river systems and ancient trails hinted at in the colonial documents. They face immense challenges, debilitating humidity, venomous snakes, and the sheer logistical nightmare of mounting an expedition in a region with no roads. Yet the lure is undeniable. Finding Paititi would be more than just a discovery of gold. It would be a monumental historical event, rewriting the final chapter of the Inca Empire and revealing how a sophisticated highland culture adapted and perhaps even thrived in the heart of the Amazon. The city remains the holy grail of South American exploration, a symbol of a world that vanished into the green, a testament to the idea that the greatest treasures are not just objects of wealth, but the lost stories of civilizations that refuse to be erased. From the final, defiant refuge of the Inca to the stormy coast of colonial America, we now dive into a story that bridges the gap between pirate legend and proven fact. This is the saga of the WWII, a vessel whose discovery transformed our understanding of the so-called golden age of piracy, turning myth into tangible history. The wider story begins not as a pirate ship but as a legitimate slave galley. Built in London in 1715, it was a state-of-the-art vessel, large, fast, and heavily armed, designed for the brutal transatlantic slave trade between Africa, the Caribbean, and England. But its career as a slaver was brutally short. In early 1717, while sailing from the Caribbean back to England, it was captured by a rising star of piracy, the charismatic Samuel Bellamy, known to his men and to history as Black Sam. Bellamy was a unique figure among pirates. He was not a cartoonish villain but a skilled navigator and a surprisingly democratic leader, often referred to as the Prince of Pirates by his crew for his fairness and boldness. He had been searching for a flagship worthy of his ambitions, and the Whydah, with its 18 guns and spacious hold, was the perfect prize. Bellamy and his crew, now over 150 strong, embraced their new vessel and embarked on an incredible spree of piracy along the eastern seaboard of the American colonies. In just a few months, they captured over 50 ships, amassing a hoard of treasure that was staggering in its variety and volume. The Whydah's hold filled not just with Spanish pieces of 8 and gold doubloons, but with a vast assortment of plunder from their victims. silver coins from Mexico, gold dust and Akan jewelry from West Africa, indigo, sugar, and ship's supplies. This was the eclectic wealth of an emerging global economy, all concentrated in the belly of a single pirate ship. This run of incredible luck came to a violent and abrupt end on the night of April 26, 1717. As the WWII sailed north, hoping to reach the pirate-friendly shores of Maine, it was caught in a monstrous nor'easter off the coast of Cape Cod. The ship, likely overloaded with treasure and struggling in the hurricane-force winds, was driven onto a sandbar. The waves smashed its hull, and the WWII capsized and broke apart, plunging to the seabed in water shallow enough to be deadly, churning with sand and wreckage. Of the nearly 150 men on board, only 2 survived. Black Sam Bellamy, his fortune, and almost his entire crew were lost to the sea. The local authorities, upon hearing the news, launched a grim salvage operation, recovering a small amount of treasure and the bodies of some of the pirates, including Bellamy himself, who was given a burial on the Cape Cod shore. But the violent storms and shifting sands quickly buried the main wreck site, and for over 250 years, the WWII and its legendary treasure remained a ghost story, a local legend whispered among the fishermen of Wellfleet. The modern hunt for the WWII is a story of one man's unwavering obsession. That man was Barry Clifford, a local salvage operator who had grown up hearing the tales of Bellamy's sunken ship. Unlike the seekers of many lost treasures, Clifford had a crucial advantage. The general location of the wreck was recorded in historical documents. The challenge was that the coastline had changed dramatically over the centuries, with sandbars constantly shifting. Armed with an old map and a primitive metal detector, Clifford and his team began a systematic search in the early 1980s. It was a painstaking process, battling rough seas and poor visibility. The breakthrough came in 1984 when Clifford's crew brought up a crusted, barnacle-encrusted object from the seabed. As they carefully chipped away the concretions, a thrill of disbelief ran through them. It was a bronze ship's bell, and etched upon it were the words, "The WWII Galley 1716. They had found it. This was the first, and remains the only, fully authenticated pirate shipwreck ever discovered in North American waters. The discovery of the bell was only the beginning. What followed was an archaeological project that continues to this day, yielding a treasure trove that is far more valuable than just gold and silver. To date, over 200,000 artifacts have been recovered from the wreck site. Yes, there are the coins, thousands of them, from various nations, fused together into large conglomerates by centuries under salt water. But the true treasure of the WWII is the unprecedented window it provides into the daily life of 18th century pirates. Archaeologists have recovered the ship's cannons, still loaded and ready to fire. They have found navigational instruments, clay pipes, weaponry like pistols and grenades, and even scraps of clothing and personal effects. One of the most poignant finds was a small silver shoe buckle, which forensic analysis suggests belonged to a young boy, perhaps a cabin servant, who perished in the wreck. These everyday objects tell a human story that cuts through the romanticized Hollywood image, revealing the reality of a dangerous, multicultural, and often short-lived profession. And yet, for all that has been recovered, the story of the WWII's treasure is far from over. The historical accounts of the ship's final voyage, including testimonies from the 2 survivors, describe a cargo of almost unimaginable scale. The plunder from 50 ships would have been enough to fill the WWII's hold to the beams. The artifacts brought up so far, while immensely significant, are believed by Clifford and his team to represent only a fraction of the total treasure. The theory is that when the ship capsized, the heaviest and most dense objects, the chests of gold and silver coins and bars, would have been thrown from the disintegrating hull and sunk quickly straight down, becoming buried deep in the sandy bottom. The main treasure pile, they believe, is still there, locked beneath several feet of sediment, waiting for a shift in the sands or a more advanced technology to reveal its exact location. The hunt continues, a slow, meticulous process of sifting through the ocean floor, driven by the conviction that the greatest part of Black Sam Bellamy's fortune is still out there, a king's ransom in pirate gold lying just beneath the waves, a secret the sea has guarded for 3 centuries. And so we come to our final treasure, a secret that does not lie beneath the waves or within a mountain cave, but is hidden across the vast, rolling steppes of Mongolia. This is the ultimate archaeological mystery, the location of the tomb of Genghis Khan, the man who forged history's largest contiguous empire by land, uniting the nomadic tribes and conquering from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea, was a figure of almost supernatural power. And the story of his burial is a testament to that power, a carefully orchestrated act of disappearance designed to ensure his spirit would never be disturbed. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, his loyal followers carried out his final wishes with ruthless precision. The funeral procession was a secret journey, and legend tells us that any unfortunate soul who crossed its path was immediately slain to preserve the route's secrecy. Even more chilling, the soldiers who served as his pallbearers and interred his body in its hidden tomb were themselves allegedly executed upon completing their sacred task. To erase the site from the earth itself, 1,000 horses were then reportedly set to gallop back and forth across the area, trampling the ground until all signs of digging and disturbance were obliterated. The earth was returned to its natural state, and the greatest conqueror the world has ever known was left to his eternal rest in a location known only to a select few who took the secret to their own graves. The potential treasures within such a tomb are the subject of intense speculation. While the Mongols were not known for building pyramids or elaborate above-ground mausoleums, their burial customs for a great Khan would have been rich with significance. This would not be a static display of wealth like a pharaoh's tomb, but a collection befitting the leader of a nomadic empire. We can imagine a burial chamber containing exquisite gold and silver artifacts gifted by or plundered from the dozens of cultures he subdued: Chinese silks and jades, Persian metalwork, and treasures from the Islamic world. There would likely be his personal arms and armor, his horse trappings, and the symbols of his authority. But perhaps the most valuable treasure of all would be the historical knowledge contained within. The tomb could hold records, artifacts, and insights that would fundamentally reshape our understanding of the Mongol Empire's origins and the man himself, a figure who remains shrouded in myth. The cultural and historical value would be immeasurable, far surpassing the monetary worth of any gold. The search for the tomb, however, is a modern-day venture fraught with immense challenges, both technological and cultural. For centuries, the site was protected by its own legend and the sheer, overwhelming scale of the Mongolian landscape. In recent decades, expeditions have employed the most advanced non-invasive technologies available. Teams have used satellite photography to scan thousands of square miles for subtle geographical anomalies that might suggest human alteration. They have deployed ground-penetrating radar and magnetometers to peer beneath the soil without disturbing it, searching for the telltale signatures of buried structures or metal objects. One of the most ambitious efforts, the Valley of the Khans project, even enlisted thousands of online volunteers to scour high-resolution satellite imagery from their home computers, a crowd-sourced attempt to find a needle in a continental-sized haystack. But the greatest obstacle is not the terrain, it is profound cultural sensitivity. To the people of Mongolia, Genghis Khan is not merely a historical figure, he is the revered father of their nation, a near-sacred ancestor. The area suspected to hold his tomb, particularly the Burkhan-Khaldun mountain region, which ancient texts hint was a place of special significance to him, is considered deeply sacred ground. Many Mongolians believe the tomb should never be found, that the peace of their great leader must not be disturbed. The idea of archaeologists digging, of potentially unearthing and displaying his remains, is viewed by many as a profound desecration. This has led the Mongolian government to impose strict bans on archaeological excavation in the most likely zones. The search, therefore, has become a delicate dance, a scientific quest that must respect spiritual beliefs, an investigation that can look but must not touch. The treasure of Genghis Khan's tomb thus remains the final, perfect enigma. It is protected not by booby traps or ocean depths, but by the will of a people and the enduring power of a legend, a secret the earth has been commanded to keep forever. And so our global expedition through these 25 legendary lost treasures reaches its final destination. From the golden halls of the Amber Room to the sunken galleons of the Spanish Main, from the sacred mystery of the Ark to the defiant secret of the Inca gold, we have traversed centuries and continents, driven by that most human of impulses, the unyielding hope of discovery. Each story, in its own way, is a testament to our ambition, our creativity, and our enduring fascination with the past. They are tales of empires built and empires fallen, of faith and betrayal, of brilliant minds who crafted wonders and desperate souls who sought to possess or protect them. These treasures are more than just precious objects. They are frozen moments in time, echoes of lives lived, battles fought, and beliefs held sacred. They remind us that history is not a sterile list of dates, but a vibrant tapestry woven with threads of gold and tragedy, a story that is still being written with every new clue uncovered. As we look back on this incredible journey, one question lingers as tantalizing as the treasures themselves. In an age of satellite imaging, deep-sea submersibles, and ground-penetrating radar, which of these legendary losses has the best chance of finally being solved within our own lifetime? Will it be the systematic, technology-driven search for a shipwreck like the Merchant Royal, whose coordinates are now tantalizingly close to being confirmed? Or perhaps the patient, scholarly work that might one day pinpoint the hiding place of the Copper Scroll's cryptic instructions? Could it be the cultural shift that allows for a respectful, collaborative search for the tomb of Genghis Khan, or the sheer luck of a scrap metal dealer stumbling upon another Fabergé egg in a forgotten attic? The race is on, and the next great discovery could be just one expedition away. The adventure does not have to end here. The search for these treasures is at its heart a conversation across generations. So now, we want to hear from you. Which of these lost treasures captured your imagination the most? Do you have a theory about the fate of the Honjo Masamune, or a favorite story about Jean Lafitte's hidden caches? Share your own thoughts and discoveries in the comments below. Let's continue this exploration together. If you enjoyed this journey into the shadows of history, if these tales of mystery and obsession sparked your own sense of wonder, then please give this video a like. It truly helps us to continue bringing these stories to you. And for more adventures, more deep dives into the world's greatest unsolved puzzles, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. The map is still unrolled, and there are always more secrets waiting just beyond the edge of the known. Thank you for watching, and until next time.